Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to tonight's work session on the FY27 budget for Thursday, May 28th. I'm going to pass it over to Karen, who's going to pass it over to Nathan, and we're going to go through some slides, answering some of the questions that we had as a council, and I know that some have come in from the public. So, Karen.
Thank you, Your Honor. We are here tonight to review where we've taken you all and to address the questions we've heard along the way. And what will be different tonight, if it's helpful to the council, is we could take questions as we approach and hit each topic rather than hold them to the end. And we may find that that yields a more comprehensive set of follow-up questions, should there be any. So without further ado, I will just point out that this is where we have been, and we've had several opportunities to discuss the budget. Tonight is the budget review, and coming up June 8th is the next regular council meeting, at which time we will contemplate the adoption of the budget. From here, Nathan will walk you all through a very brief summary of the budget highlights, and then he will hit one by one the questions by topic.
Good evening, Mayor, councilors, members of the public. If I remind you just quickly, the budget that is proposed for you for FY27 is $157,971,390. It's a change of 5.11%. If I haven't said it 3 or 6 or 8 or 100 times, the health has been the biggest driver. It's 2.21% of that total 5.11. Leaves 2.9% increase across the board for all other costs, and would result in an estimated tax rate of $12.07, which is an increase of 56 cents per thousand, estimated. Clearly, we're a long way from that becoming the tax rate, and the estimated rate of tax change, in that case, 4.88%. And we'll talk in a few more minutes about the FTEs, but that general fund budget is reduced by a total of 9.06 full-time equivalents, and when we net out all changes, that comes back up, if you will, a reduction of 6.32 overall, including all funds. So on the next slide, I provided for you a summary that clumps, if you will, or compiles into some smaller categories, bigger categories, but a smaller list, elements of the budget, so that I could walk down through. As we prepared to answer some of the questions that have been asked, it started to feel like tonight might be a little bit of whack-a-mole, because there were a variety of questions all across the board. And so instead, I'm going to walk through the budget essentially from the beginning to end, compartmentalized or broken down into components, and try to pause for just a moment and answer maybe unasked questions, especially with regard to a couple of areas that we don't normally get a chance to talk about. So I hope that it will be educational, while at the same time trying to address the questions, and I'll do my best to call out the questions as we move through. So here is the proposed summary. The next slide then will speak to salaries and benefits as the first component. And so for those that are following along and looking at your notes, salaries and benefits as a total is just over $107 million. It represents an increase overall of $5.835 million, which is 5.73%. The category of salaries is the first of those, so let's talk about salaries. There's been a lot of conversation through the course of your meetings about salaries, and we'll talk over the next 2 or 3 slides about some of those details. It's important to note that in the aggregate, all salaries, all departments across the board, salaries are rising by $1.5 million, a total increase of 2.33%. We're going to talk about some examples where folks picked out, and we're looking at increases of 11+%. The reality is that all salaries, all in, 2.33% year over year, $1.5 million. And that already reflects a 3.03% COLA, our COLA being the 10-year rolling average of the Consumer Price Index. The November release is what we use. That number came out at just 2.8, essentially. The CPI was, added that into the 10-year rolling average, 3.03 is the COLA then, and that's a definition that's in our collective bargaining agreements. We'll talk about that in a minute. So all of that is built in. Additionally, these budgeted salaries reflect the 9.06 FTEs that have been reduced. It's worth noting that across the board, Our salaries are driven by 15 collective bargaining agreements that we have with our union groups. The COLA is built in as an escalating factor in each of those contracts, or there's some version of that. And we have 5 of the 15 that are unsettled right now, or are expiring at the end of June. And we're going to talk about that in a second as well. So, sir.
Just a question on salaries and benefits. Was looking back over the last 4 years, and thanks for having all the data accessible there. It looks like we're between 1.7% and 4.4% in terms of over budgeting because of vacancies. Have we considered taking maybe a vacancy factor and putting it more conservative than the least, or the most conservative year at like a 1.25%, and carried that through the entire salaries and benefits to see what we would save?
No, but that's an exercise we could absolutely do. What you're suggesting is that we're budgeting and yet we experience vacancies throughout the course of the year, so not all salary dollars are expended.
Right.
And if you could project some of that annual savings, you could reduce it from the budget. And the clarification I would just want to throw out is that means that you will reduce on an annual basis the fund balance that you have left over. And that means you will struggle to meet changing needs, and we may risk that your AAA rating could be something. And I've heard that thrown out every time, even before I came to this role. And I don't think you want to live in fear that the AAA will be changed. But right now we've managed to settle pretty steadily at the 13.6 level for your fund balance. And if in fact we gamble that we won't fill and find that as a statistical reality and then cut that, that's what falls to the fund balance on an annual basis. So
Right, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying like a gamble. If it's a gamble, then, I'm not looking to push that. But in terms of, like where it's been on the high side of 4 and the low side of, 1.7, if we could take below all of those and say, hey, what would this look like in terms of a budget going forward for the next year to see, what that would look like, that would be helpful to see if there's something that we can save there.
it would not be small money, obviously, on 67 million, even 1%.
It would not be,
Even
no.
1% is real money, so.
Yep. Councilor Davis?
Counselor.
Just to follow up on that, have we ever looked at the reserve amount for vacation time that we accrue, and have we over accrued for that?
So let me defer that question for just another couple of moments. We're going to talk about leave of term. We haven't had any of that conversation in the time I've been with you, so I thought we'd talk about that for a minute, and we can address it then.
Councilor Beck.
Any other?
Councilor Bagley?
Sure.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nathan, so just looking at this, I see, total of all salary and wages goes up 2.33%. However, COLA, which the vast majority of our employees gets, goes up by a bigger number. I'm assuming the difference is because, 1, there's a reduction of FTEs, but 2, you might have high income earners retire who are replaced by lower income earners, and that's why there might be they look like they don't match up exactly.
Absolutely. I think what you're seeing is the result of that compiled. So you certainly have some savings because of your hiring, and then you have the FTE change. We're going to talk about retirement in a moment, but if you skip down the slide slip down the slide a couple of numbers, you'll note that retirement, which is not changing and based upon wages, isn't really falling, because in the mix, some of the positions that are departing were not eligible for retirement, and that wasn't a factor. So there are moving parts in all of these, and absolutely, I think that's the explanation for why you're at 2.3 as opposed to 3.03.
Thank you.
Anything else in the area of salaries? Okay, then let's move to the next slide and talk about the head count. Just wanted to make sure that we talked about the 9.06 and folks were reminded so that we could dig if you wanted to or needed to. There are 4 departments essentially that are involved in the changing head count. In the inspection department, we saw an increase of 0.6 FTE. We had an existing employee who was allocated 40% of the time as an electrical inspector to the inspection department. The other 60%, they were actually doing electrician's work. And I'm going to steal all of Shanti's thunder, but if, you know, if you were to bring the director up, the director would tell you that in 2020, we fielded 683 inspection requests. In 2025, that number is just shy of 3,000. And we had brought on the part-timer to try to address some of that growing need. And ultimately, Shanti came to us at the beginning of this cycle, the beginning of fiscal 26, actually, and said, I gotta have extra help, or we're gonna go back to the days of yesterday, which had long lists or long lines of waits for permitting, for inspections. And so he made that move, and would tell you that even today, the inspection count at the end of third quarter had climbed beyond 2,100 this year. So, so there's the first. That's not even to speak to the revenues, because obviously those inspections generate revenues, and so to the extent that this was a position that funded itself, that was how we treated it at the beginning of the year, and at this point, we hope to carry that forward. Although certainly the director is the first, he'll be the first of our team to stand up and say if the numbers are changing, he'd be willing to let go of staffing that are not directed by the need. The second position that's being added this year in the net 9 reduction is Deputy Fire Chief Training, that I know Council has had some conversation with the Fire Chief about. So I'll let that be for now. And then I'll tell you that in the area of the Public Works, the Department of Public Works, there were a net reduction of 3.1 FTEs in his area, in Highway. One of those is the actual reduction of a custodian. The other 2.1 of reduction are reallocations, half a position and a half an FTE moving to parking, and 0.8 to each water and sewer. I'm sure when the director has a chance to speak to you, he'd tell you that the work that they do in water and sewer is regulatory in nature, and that those decisions and these reallocations are to try to best connect the work being done by our staff to the source of funding that should pay for the work being done. And then in the school department, there were a net reduction of 7.5 FTEs. Two that I would address first would be to remind you that in the central office, a clerical position related to personnel work has been reduced in the next budget, as has the assistant business administrator position. Those are positions that the city will support. Human Resources will pick up some of the work that was being done by that personnel-focused individual, and the finance office will work to support the superintendent and the new business administrator with the accounting support that was being rendered by the assistant business administrator. There's the increase, or the addition, please, of the assistant special ed director that, again, you've had conversation with the superintendent about. There were a handful of moves in the area of teaching. The net of that is a reduction of 1 teaching position, but included in that is an increase of 1, if you will, the middle school RISE position that I know some of you asked about and commented on. Additionally, there was a net reduction of 2.5 paraeducators, 2 tutors, and a net reduction of 1 high school clerical position. So when it's all said and done, it's 9.06, just over 9 full-time equivalents. And I take the opportunity to remind you that we reduced in the general fund 10.7 positions last year. Add the 9 that we're talking about this year, and we're at just shy of 20 reduced position in the general fund over these 2 years. And if you reach to all funds, that looks like almost 21.5 positions reduced. Before we go any further, questions that you might have about the FTE headcount?
Councilor Bowe?
Thank you. Does this include the Director of Pupil Services? Is that
The assistant
Okay.
special ed director, yes, I'm sorry, wow. I may not have shown this to the superintendent, because my language was different from his.
Yeah.
That's regrettable on my part. Yes, that's the same position.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Flynn?
Nathan, and just to clarify that, as you have the Assistant Special Education Director, I mean, this is an effort to mitigate and manage a little bit because the high cost of the special ed kids and supporting that program. This is an effort to try to mitigate a little bit of that, yeah.
Is he saying yes back there?
He's nodding.
Then I'll take it. If you have a deeper question, I could certainly invite the superintendent to join us.
Nathan, what's the loaded cost of the fire, at the deputy fire chief salary plus benefits?
I think the number I was carrying was 177,000 and some change, and that does not, I don't know that that includes health and dental. I don't know that includes health. I think in all of my numbers I didn't, we're behind in health, so I'm not cutting. I would recommend we not try to subtract from the health category when we're behind and going to use the reserve funds as it is. So I think 177,000 something is what I've got.
Okay. Counselor Tabor and Counselor Bowe.
And the same, Nathan, for the new position in the schools,
In the schools?
loaded cost.
Yep. I don't have that off the top.
Okay.
I think,
But
but
probably close to 200.
again, with the net reduction of 7.5, I think we would, in this case, be looking at salary and tax retirement, so it's probably shy of 200, but you're not carrying that, are you?
Yeah, I'm not carrying that, but I think your estimate is probably.
So close to, you're going to pull that up?
Okay,
So we'll-
and just for
we'll
questions.
keep talking and we're gonna have it.
So, just to maybe just put more, let's get through the presentation. If there's specific questions on departmental, we'll get back to the departmental. So, is that all right?
Yeah, my hope was that we not lose, we not have to spend your time
Yeah, no, it's
redefining.
great
so
to
it's
be able to
great.
ask questions on
Yep.
these. There's a lot that's in this presentation that is just going to be questions of the council, but as it gets into, let's just make a note if it's
Yep.
specific to a department, we'll just save that to the end so we can have department level
Perfect.
questions.
Okay, next slide. So, again, I wasn't sure that the council all were familiar, and the public would be in the same category for a number of folks. So thought we would take a minute and just walk through our salary and wage scales, generally speaking, are a matrix of grade and step. Sometimes that grade reflects the position or the level of the position, and the step generally reflects experience, time in grade. Each year, that salary schedule gets advanced generally according to the terms of the collective bargaining agreement by a calculated COLA, what we just talked about a minute ago, the 10-year rolling average. I would shout out that if you haven't heard me speak yet about the 10-year rolling COLA, the 10-year rolling COLA, what I would argue is for the taxpayers been a good solution. We run behind the CPI on a 10-year rolling average because of the, we run behind, I'm trying to see that spreadsheet in my head. We run behind the Social Security index by a measurable number, 0.5%, I think. We stay behind over the last 10 years of the COLA that we've used. And so it works, and we can dive into that another time if you'd like. In the slide, there's actually an excerpt from one of our collective bargaining agreement salary scales. And in that, you can see the grade down the left-hand side, and you can see the steps running across the top. In scales that look like this, generally speaking, you're hired in the early steps based upon your amassed experience when you come to us. On an annual basis, employees advance a step if one's available to them. And schedules obviously start at lower amounts. And we have, at least in this example, but in most of the general government contracts, you have a 5% escalator in early years. 5% certainly feels like a big percentage, but it's against a smaller amount. And it ends effectively when you hit the 4th or 5th year that you're with the city. And then you wait until you've had a service of 7.5 years. And at that point, you get another step, which is worth 1%. Then you wait until you've been here 10 years, and there's another step, and then you wait until you've been here 15 years. So at the higher end of the scale, where you are making a higher salary or higher wage, the increases are smaller, reflecting that they still represent larger dollars. So I wanted to share that as a backgrounder, so that you could appreciate when we talk about, we've had folks talk about looking at a salary in the FY26 book and seeing a number, and then looking at a salary in the FY27 book and seeing a number, and coming up with a calculated increase of a number like 11+%. So I would share with you that at the same time we're using these scales, we're negotiating some of them. And on a slide just coming up, I'll remind you about the collective bargaining contingency that we have in the budget for unsettled contracts that are expiring this year, June 30th. We'll need dollars to settle those accounts and fund the increases, the cost items included, next year. In the budget today, for an unsettled contract, somebody whose contract is expiring, you would not see a COLA because a COLA can't be awarded, it hasn't been negotiated yet. In FY '26, we had 8 of our contracts that were expiring and being negotiated. And so our reserve, our contingency last year was $1.99 million. As those all settled, coming to the council and being voted, the dollars from the contingency were transferred into departmental lines to cover those increases in their salary lines. And so in the budget book for FY '26, when we put it together, you had somebody who didn't have a COLA. So if I were to pick the sheet that I left in my book, excuse me, so I don't get this wrong, if I were to just pick a number that we could work with easily and say $50,000, if we had an employee making $50,000, that's what was listed in the book for FY '26, but when the negotiation was over and the contract had been approved by the council, we would have increased that salary line by 2.84%, almost 3, right? Remember, almost 3%. So the book said 50, but in fact that person was going to make 51,420 because there's a 2.84% increase that gets transferred in after the book was published. After the fiscal year starts, it gets transferred when you approve that collective bargaining agreement. Now into the FY '27 book, we add a 5% step because this, in this case, this employee happens to be a relatively new employee and is still early in the scale and sees a 5% step increase. That 5% now moves that number to almost 54,000. And then we apply, because that's what the collective bargaining directs, 3.03% COLA this year for FY '27. And so the end result is that the FY '27 book shows 55.6 versus what it showed last year, which was 50. So now you see a $5,600 increase. And just for rough math, if you said almost 3 plus 5 is 8 plus another 3 is 11, over those 2 years, it was in fact 11. It's not an 11% raise in a given year, but it reflects from book to book. By the same token, but a slightly different scenario, you have cases today where you have, one of the unions that's negotiating right now is 1386A. It's the DPW workers, the public works folks. There will be experienced people at the top of the scale who are not entitled, they're not eligible for a step increase this year. So their $50,000 position in the FY '26 budget book still looks like 50,000 maybe in this book, because they weren't negotiating last year. Their 50,000 already had the COLA baked in. This year, they're not entitled to a step, and there's no COLA because we're still negotiating that. So their position is still 50,000. It doesn't mean that it's going to stay 50,000, because once they settle their 1386 successor agreement and you ratify it, we'll move money, presumably for 3.03, although I'm not involved in the negotiations, don't know where that's at. But whatever the rate of increase is, we'll move that into the line, and then you'll see it. But so if you take last year's book and this year's book and you pick accounts, you pick lines and see that, or pick individuals, you may see that folks don't have an increase or do. And the devil's in the details, because depending on which category they're in, negotiating, not negotiating, have their dollars in contingency or not, that would give you a different result. And that is not to suggest that there weren't some changes. Individuals were hired, people left, there were position changes that got made. There may be examples where you can find that there are exceptions to that, but as a rule, fitting within $1.5 million and 2.33 increase overall, some of what has been described at the microphone is explained because we're in the middle of negotiations, even as we're in the middle of budgeting each year. I thought about 2 or 3 different slides to try to do that visual math, and probably we should have, but how did we do? Did that make sense, folks, generally? Questions about that before we, questions about that concept, I guess, before we walk away?
I think it would be helpful maybe just to see like how much of, in terms of salary benefits, is represented by COLA, and how much of it is represented by step increases. That could be a simple way to show that, so that, we could, without having to have you come to dinner every time and explain all of that, just explain, what's the percentage there? And I think that, it's helpful to understand all the steps that we have early, in terms of trying to keep employees, incentivize them to stay, and then as they become smaller but more meaningful step increases as the longevity piles up. So maybe that's just one thing. I don't necessarily need that for this budget, but a way to be able to kind of show this going forward would be helpful.
It'd be an excellent addition to the budget highlights, for instance, to do or to the personnel summary, that section. We could dig there. Okay, thank you. All right, next slide then, I guess. Among the things that have been discussed was a request to talk about and see the vacancies as they're listed. So the vacancies were broken down into ultimately 3 different slides. So here's the first, which is general fund on the municipal side. And I won't list them all, describe them all, but the list is in your slides. The administrative assistant in the city clerk's office is a position that has been advertised, and we are at a conditional offer status right now, working with a final candidate. In the finance office, we have an accountant 3 position that is posted. This position was not going to be filled for at least the first half of the year because it was going to fund the assistant business administrator position that is being reduced from the city's, from the school budget. But we needed that person to be there to close the year and help us through to the transition to going live in the new accounting software, 1st of January. But with that position coming vacant at the end of June, we've now posted to make sure that we fill so that we can continue to support all of the tasks that we have, including now the work that we'll do to support the superintendent and the school department. The Human Resources generalist position is driven by a retirement in Human Resources, and they're on the final steps now with a candidate for a retirement that has been planned and is imminent now. And then I want to call your attention in the vacancies here that essentially are part of the Highway Department of the Public Works, and offer something that we're going to see if I can't do better and make simpler next year. In the subsequent slide that is enterprise, water, sewer, parking, you're going to see these 2 equipment mechanics that are here. You're going to see them show up over and over and over again, and ultimately it's going to look like there might be 8 people being hired when in fact there's 2, because these 2 positions are funded a third from general fund highway, a third from water, a third from sewer, and a 10th from parking. So they show up on this list. And much like we do in the CIP, we have projects and then we have the combined projects at the end of the slide deck or the element sheets. I propose we do something like that so that as we look at vacancies, it doesn't look so overstated, because in this case, there's these 2 positions that are split in their funding. In addition to the list that we have here, I wanted to I'll tell you that the fire department has no posted vacancies, as I understand it right now. The police chief was with you recently and updated you on what I think was 7 new recruits headed to the academy that he reported out on, and so his vacancy list looks different than it has of late. And right now, there was a conversation just yesterday, I think, or the day before, that we have lost a dispatcher, and so there are, I believe, 4 vacant positions in dispatch, but there are also multiple applicants that are in the background check process right now. And so Human Resources didn't have evidence of a posted position right now that she could report on, but they're working right now to use those candidates against the vacancies that exist. So that's the first piece. I guess we should go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you very much. The second then is schools, most of which is general fund, but in the case of food service, that's a special revenue of its own. But in the case of schools, we're in the peak season of hiring, or maybe the superintendent would suggest we're coming to the tail end of the heavy hiring season. It's important that you identify vacancies that you have for the fall and fill them. If you wait until July or August, the pool of candidates generally, and I say this cavalierly, but with some history or some experience, the pool of candidates is largely made up of those that didn't get hired anywhere else. So your hiring for professionals is well on its way, if not wrapping up. But we do, I think, in the schools routinely have some turnover, even through the course of the school year, in the custodial ranks, where you'll see right now 6 positions that they're looking to cover, they're looking to fill, a handful of paraeducators, in this case at 2 of our schools, and then a list there of 6 more cafeteria workers. The administrative support position that's listed is a clerical position in the central office. It is not the position that's been reduced from the proposed budget. It's another clerical position that is essentially administrative assistant to everybody up there in the schools, including the assistant superintendent, the business administrator, the facilities department, and the food service department as well. So that's an important position they're advertising for now. And then there's a professional position left right now, which is the ELO, Extended Learning Opportunities Coordinator for the high school and the Career and Tech Center. And that is a teaching position that is waiting right now for the new CTE director to be named so that that individual can take part in the hiring process.
The director has been named,
That director has been named.
and now they'll be.
And now we're working on that.
Tuesday night, we confirmed that.
Tuesday night, so Tuesday night, we've got a new director, and now we'll move forward. Questions there? Okay. Now let's talk about benefits. For what it's worth, we've talked about benefits a lot in the last 4, 5, 6 months, so I thought maybe I would just hit the highlights and remind you that unless I've missed something, there are no optional or not optional. There are no voluntary benefits. There are no extra benefits. These are all contractually driven. In the case of health insurance, we've talked about the fact that school care is up 26.2%, and the Anthem plans are up, health trust plans are up 11.4%. We talked some about the stabilization reserve. The stabilization reserve for health was created in 2001. And that's going to lead me to the leave of term in a moment, but I want to not miss the opportunity to restate the fact that the school care assessment, the $1.57 million bill that we are facing, is not part of the budget. We've not budgeted for that FY27. So if, for instance, we found a pathway to not paying that, that certainly would be a savings of $1.57 million that you might otherwise spend, but it's not budgeted for in FY27. The intent is that those dollars will be found in savings in this current budget. Salary variances because of vacancies, things that we will hold back on, end-of-year encumbrances that we might otherwise have executed on that we won't, because we'll use all of those dollars to make payment against the 1.57. I appreciated the counselor calling that out last time because I hadn't addressed it, so I want to make sure I said that again, and thank you. Leave of termination. Again, in case there are those of you that haven't been a part of that conversation in the past, leave of termination was a stabilization reserve that was established in 1999 to manage the impact of accumulated unused leave. In the 90s, it was identified in the city that we had a growing liability that was more than significant because we had no governance on, no limits on leave time that could be accumulated when unused. And so leading up to and through 1996, the city did a lot of work in establishing in language in our collective bargaining agreements limitations on that, and grandfathered folks who were employed as of a date in 1996, retaining for themselves the eligibility to be paid out for a share of that accumulated unused leave. That continues to represent a liability, and went back and double-checked and updated the data. We are down now to 29 employees, 2 of those in water sewer, 1 of those each in police and fire, and 18 on the school side, leaving 5 others in general government. And did I do that right? 5, 2, 7. Yep. So, and it's in your slide. But so we've identified that, and right now that the balance in that leave at term is right about $1 million at the end of FY25, and if you used as a round number $100,000 for every one of those 29, they should all not be, most of them won't exceed that, so that's a high number. Some of them are in categories that are not professional, so their numbers are measurably lower. But in the range of $2.5 to $3 million, we'll revisit over the course of this next year what we need to do, because as you contemplate in a very non-specific way, the relative age of folks that have now been with us since 1996, we have to be in the handful of years, the last handful of years in which we'll see most of those folks retire and exercise on this privilege.
Nathan, is there, I guess in terms of those conversations, you said there's 29 employees, and the fund is at what level right now? We have
$1 million?
$1 million. I guess has there been any thought to, so somebody will get this and it will be a check on their W-2 and it will be taxable, right?
In most cases, they take that check over multiple years, but yes, sir, it's taxable regardless.
Is there any, I guess, is there like the present value of, have we considered like the present value of money for these employees and looking at to see if there's any way that would make sense for them financially and make sense for us, since they have better opportunities to invest income or money than we do as a city? Is there a way to pay them that money faster through some vehicle that is that would have a better tax benefit for them, that would allow them to potentially earn more money on that money than otherwise that they would have? And is that something that would create a delta for us in terms of savings? I know it's a big question.
No, it's a
right
great
now.
question. It would have, that, I would say in nearly all cases, those would be negotiated conversations, right? And so it's worth looking at. I think one of the other, well, I don't want to give bargaining tips to the other side of that conversation. So there are some reasonable arguments that I would make if I were among that group that would make me want to do this one way or another, you know, because I think it would look different on their end. But certainly I think it's worth looking at and analyzing if there could be some resolution or settlement that would see them take the dollars and do with it what they like. To be fair, I think it's worth saying out loud, the best value for an employee that has that contractual opportunity to benefit from their longevity and their lack of consumption of leave time that was theirs, the biggest hit is that they're in their highest paid years, if they take this payout and avoid some of the limitations in the retirement system's calculation of your pension, if they take it late, then those become their best years, and those best years look even better, and that leaves them with a greater pension payout than they would otherwise have seen. And so if you had 5 years left of service and you took that cash now, it would be a very interesting analysis to know if your pension impact of waiting would be offset by your ability to earn with that money if you put it in the market right now, for instance. So,
And then how much we're contributing to the retirement
Retirement
system
system.
versus how much New Hampshire would be
Amen.
contributing to that retirement
Right.
system. So, I mean, I'm happy for the state to pick up more
Pick up
of
more,
that.
sure.
So,
it's a great, I mean, but we can definitely do that analysis. I think that's, now, I mean, I thought that the number was a little bit larger, but you know, over the course of this fiscal year, as most fiscal years, we have retired some number of them. So that number had fallen greater than I thought, or lower than I thought.
Counselor Cook?
I guess to follow on to that, the higher your pay at the end of your employment, the more you pay for your Medicare as well. And as some of those calculations are changing, it might be worthwhile to look at this with some employees, because the differential may not benefit them in the long run for their increased Medicare premiums, so.
Excellent. So before I leave a term, I just should answer Councilor Tabor's question and tell you that leave a term, in some of the literature, some of the work that the documentation I worked with when I first started, we referred to it, or it was referred to as the sick leave at termination account. And it's fair for me to say that right now, leave at term is the language that I now more fully understand, and I can tell you that we continue to budget for, and will need to continue to budget for some smaller amount in departments, even after the 29 have been retired, because the liability, the reserve now is managing the annual flow of contractually supported payouts for unused leave on an annual basis that we have in some of our smaller contracts, some of our contracts. So that reserve ought to dwindle measurably as we move the 29 out. But annual leave, I guess, is really the category that I'm talking about, because nobody's getting paid out for any sick leave now. But annual leave that you're able to accumulate and then is payable at your departure, your termination, those will continue to be impacts, liabilities that I think we'll want to carry in that. It just won't have a great liability, as great a liability, so we'll be able to manage that.
Yeah, we just found at our corporation that we had accrued as if every employee might leave the next month and need all their vacation pay.
Right.
And we built a substantial amount of money on the balance sheet. And we were passed off to private equity owners who instantly looked at that and said, that's our money.
Right.
So, you know, but
I
by
would not-
example, that would be the taxpayers' money.
I would not imagine that any reserve we'd want to keep after the 1996 commitments are resolved. That would not be a substantial reserve. It would simply be a budget smoothing against multiple employees that were carrying some measurable balance. But I think it'll be worth doing the analysis and seeing what that is, because it may be something that, going back to the notion of vacancies, salary, unspent salary dollars every year, it may be something that we can reasonably cover statistically in that area. So New Hampshire retirement system is next. The New Hampshire retirement system is showing an increase of $394,000. That is tied to salary change year over year. The rates are unchanged in New Hampshire retirement. I can tell you that the New Hampshire retirement is described in the budget book first on page 15 in the budget highlight. And so there's not a lot of news with regard to FY27 because the rates are unchanged year over year. But I did want to tell you, only because I was surprised to see it on the retirement system's website, that middle of April, they've already announced what the next biennial rates will be for FY28 and 29. The news is very good for us. There's a substantial rate reduction coming that will generate savings in our budgeting process for FY28. It will then stay level for FY29. The state, the retirement system does this in 2-year cycles. Employee contributions are unchanged, but the employer contributions are falling. And quick calculation says that it will be measurable and helpful, certainly in that budget cycle next year. Any questions about retirement? And then in the next slide, if I take you there, Councilor Cook asked a question in one of our sessions about the loss of the state's contribution against teachers, police, and fire employees. And so I put together a quick slide, or I resurrected and updated a quick slide that gives you or illustrates for you the year-over-year impact that loss has inflicted, if you will, on local taxpayers. I did give the state credit for the one-time payment of $624,000 in FY23, but otherwise this graph leads to just shy of $40 million, 39.2 million over the course of those years from FY10 to this coming FY27 projected. So other benefits, just to round out the conversation about salary and benefits. Other benefits include all the payroll-related expenditures, your Social Security and Medicare. Those are actually increasing by 1.74%, about $126,000 of new money overall in benefits. And the expenses, the payroll expenses, are about $87,000. Dental insurance. I want to walking through these other benefits. I thought I would try to address the request for some background or some information on rate change and the why. And so I can remind you that our municipal coverage with Health Trust and Delta Dental is up 4.4%. With Cigna Dental and on the school side, it's up 4%. Total dental increase is about $12,800 citywide. So those dollars didn't add up to huge increases. The rate change is driven primarily in both of those pooled programs by cost increases in actual dental care, inflationary based, as well as our claims rate. Our medical rate setting is far more complicated with pharmacy trends and medical trends and the like. But dental insurance, at least with our risk pools, is fairly straightforward. But it's also important to note that in FY27, the rates are adding a measure for their risk pool reserves. And that's true in all of our risk pools. So we'll talk about that again. In the area of life insurance and disability insurance, eligible employees are provided these, and rates are unchanged, but rates are also driven, or the coverage is driven by salary levels. So there is some increase. In this case, life is up $5,000 and long-term disability citywide is up $8,000. And those are related to the changing rates of salaries rather than the coverage itself. Our municipal employees are covered by Health Trust through Madison National Life, school employees through Moss & Moss with Sun Life Financial, and those rates are driven by our workforce demographics. So ages, obviously rates, salaries, and our claims history, as well as economics across the board. And then there's a small amount, $14,000, that is tied up in contractual items for continuing education, the fees to support flex spending programs, et cetera. So that's the majority of other benefits, although if we can go to the next slide, workers' compensation is the last of those. But I thought I'd talk about property and liability at the same time because they're both provided to us by Primex, the New Hampshire Public Risk Management Exchange, which is another risk pool in addition to School Care and Health Trust that serves the city. We participate in these two programs, and in both cases, they have told us and would explain to you that that our exposures, so in the area of property and liability, it's property value, the nature of that which is being covered. In the area of workers' comp, it would be payroll dollars and those increases, as well as claims experience, are significant drivers. Today, they are suffering the rising costs of reinsurance, which are somewhat inflationary and somewhat driven by geopolitical realities and losses that they've experienced. But they point in both cases to increased contingency reserves for the pool. What really seemed to be, to coincide here was the reduction or the elimination of the CAP program. And for those of you that have been around a day or two with us on the council, you have approved in the past a CAP, which is a contribution assurance program, which is a multi-year commitment that we would stay with the pool, and the pool would then put a limit on our rate increase. And they have eliminated the caps, discontinued them across the board. And it sure appears that what has happened is that we have been shielded from some reasonable rate increases that should have happened. Sounds familiar in the pool concept. And they now have to make back and replenish the reserves. And so you see in the analysis that across the board, general government, police, and schools are up measurably. And those are not driven by dramatic increases in claims experience. They're driven more by the needs of the reserve, needs of the pool. And I would remind you that the workers' comp change in fire was a reassessment of the risk statewide for volunteer and call-in officers as opposed to full-time professional officers like we have, recognizing that we actually represent a lesser risk, and the volunteer call-ins are now being assessed a greater amount of risk and thus a greater amount of cost for the coverage. In the area of property and liability, the city saw a 33% increase, and the school's looking at 7.5%. What I also wanted to call out from one of the questions that was asked was there are discounts that have already been in place for us for CALIA accreditation in both workers' comp and in property and liability. And it was noted for me that in the area of property and liability, they're continuing. This Primex is actually looking now at state accreditation to see if it would indicate appropriately a discount in liability as well. That doesn't exist yet, but it may. Sir.
Have we looked at, and is Primex the only game in town? Have we looked at others?
It's the only pool after the elimination of PLT, which was another risk pool. Primex right now is the only other pool of its type in the state. There's been a couple of attempts. I have in the past looked at commercial insurance, and there are some entities that have made that move. I will tell you, though, it's a cultural shift because the risk pool the risk pool lives, now this is me, it's editorial, I guess it's an opinion, but the risk pool lives by statute and covers everything that we need to have covered. The commercial insurance comes in with a 15-page inventory and talks to you about everything that will not be covered, and they walk through exclusions. And it's a totally different, it's a different kind of coverage. Certainly it prices differently, and we could certainly, if the, as well, especially if the pools are all gonna start to see this kind of concern expressed in their rates, we could certainly take a swing and look at some of the commercial opportunities that are out there.
Is it, are we able to know what will be excluded from that?
Oh, yeah, I
before?
mean, yeah, I mean, that's the one time that I did it, that's what it was a 3-hour visit to walk through everything that represents an exposure to identify what would be limited, what would be excluded. And it was an exercise for me personally, because it asked me to go and learn about what my legal limits were and what my legal obligations were under statute in a way that with the pools, I never had to, because they cover everything that's statutory.
So I guess, you know, it would be helpful to know, obviously, it's a more exhaustive exercise certainly than for this year. But given the, it's hard to imagine that, well, now I'm editorializing, but if it's the risk pool for the entire state, and they only recently figured out that we should be treating firefighters that are professional and trained different than volunteer firefighters, there might be some other areas in which we're carrying risk for smaller communities that are not as professionally run. So to understand what the thing, like where there could be synergies with our departmental staff and understanding that, and if we can be commercially insured versus the risk pool, is something that certainly would want to see for FY '28, because this is probably something that is, you know, going to continue if this has been a trend and they had the cap before.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
good.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I have a question about these two different types between workers' comp and property and liability.
Yep.
Can these be split out with different insurers, or is this a one package that you
No, you could take workers' comp and go in one direction and P&L and go in another for sure.
Okay.
And within P&L, I think you could even break down, because within our property and liability, we not only see property liability, but we also have our professional errors and omissions, bonding of treasurer, bonding of, you know, all of that is in P&L as well. And I think that was one of the things I learned as well going through the commercial exercise was not everything that I had traditionally seen as P&L had to be in that same bucket. So absolutely, you could break this in 2, maybe 3 or 4 pieces. Yep.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. Then the next slide is really for your reference. It was in deference to the conversation about multiple insurances, just providing by insurance, by general government and charter, where we're seeing increases of what percentages and what dollars. So I won't spend a lot of time there other than to say it's in your file now for reference. Contingency, collective bargaining contingency. We're budgeting, as I said, for 5 of the 15 city unions. There's $460,000, and that'll live in your budget on the contingency line. And then as you see the resolution and approve contracts over the course of the year, those dollars will be transferred into departmental lines where those salaries and taxes have impact. Next up, other operating. So I'm moving to another category now. So I dealt with salary and benefits first, and that's good. That was 76% of the whole budget. If you think that means that we'll speed up now and be quick, then I don't know. Maybe I'm lying to you. But I hope that it's educational and worth the investment of time. In the category of other operating, we're a total of $1 million of new money. It's 5%, but it's 13.6 of the overall budget, and it's 13% of the increase as well. I wanted to draw your attention to energy. This is a catch-all for electricity as well as natural gas and gasoline, and say to you that multiple departments had expressed concern about the Strait of Hormuz and the geopolitical realities right now and the price at the pump and where things could be going. And they all were asking for some contingency to be added to the budget to help with this. The challenge with that is, if you add 50 or 60,000 or more of contingency to get to where we were trying to get to, you'd have to cut 50 or 60,000 of something else. And so as it stands, we have left the budget without a contingency in this regard, and anticipate the department heads impacted by the price of gas will have to make concessions or adjustments over the course of the year as we identify how bad the situation is. Now, having said that, there's also a citywide contingency that we carry in non-operating, and so that exists as an opportunity to resolve challenges that arise as they do. I should have said at the outset, we are locked down with contracts for our electricity and our natural gas across the city. Any adjustment that you see in those lines is due to consumption, changes in consumption that have allowed us to save some dollars. And the reason I drew your attention to this is that categorically, all of it is down 10 grand as opposed to being up by 50 or 60 like department heads might have liked. The next item I talked to you about is welfare, and just remind you that direct assistance grew in the FY26 budget, anticipating, because of changes administratively in DC and how that trickle down might affect support programs that would impact our residents. Working with Jody Carnes, our director, we made increases in the FY26 budget. She has thankfully not seen the need expressed in cost the way that we might have anticipated. And so moving into 27, she's made reductions essentially in shelter and emergency shelter, totaling just over $40,000. And if she were to come to the microphone, I think she would lay responsibility for much of that on the greater level of case management work that we've done, the impact of social workers in the conversation, and our ability to work effectively with PHA as well as with our shelters and supportive agencies in the region, such that we're providing services with less expensive solutions, greater management, greater foresight. So those are the first two. If you look at the screen before we leave it, pupil transportation, special education services are next, as well as other non-salary. Go to the next slide.
Nathan, if I might, Councilor Bagley had his hand up.
Just jumping back to the energy fuels.
Yes, sir.
I presume that's primarily gasoline or diesel for all the vehicles that the city has.
The concern is for diesel or, yep.
And in my industry, it's import-export business. Quotes that went out 2 months ago all have like a fuel surcharge if it's coming from West Coast port or East Coast port. So that's a real tangible added expense that wasn't anticipated when this budget was put together.
Right.
At least for me, it would be helpful to have, is that number 50,000 the appropriate number? And if we were to create a contingency fund, one, is that the right size? And two, what would have that, adding that to the budget have on the overall effect of the numbers? I don't need that right now, just.
We've got it. I think that's a number that was offered to me and I refused it, in that when I just said, we'll have to figure that out as we roll. But yeah, we can get that.
Nathan, what's in the other
We're going there, yep.
non-salary?
Yep, let me hit these next couple slides, and then I'll be at non-salary. I'll be at the other.
So the other non-salary, we're going to come back to?
Yep, we're going to come back to.
Okay, all right.
So I didn't want to miss, before we leave energy all the way behind, there was a question asked from the podium about an increase in electricity measurable in recreation. In fact, we've zeroed out the recreation division that was called summer camps. Those salaries have moved to his special revenue where those salaries are funded by program revenues. And all that was left behind were an electricity and a rentals account. And we've moved those up into the administration division so that we can carry them there. You'll see that we've spliced pages 373 and 374, pulled those out. You can see that we moved them out of summer camp and into admin. Didn't want to miss the opportunity to answer that question. Next up is pupil transportation. Superintendent is here if you had questions, but I would tell you that $441,000 of increase is nearly 20%. But over just shy of half of that is related to our out-of-district transportation costs, moving to our out-of-district sites. And another 40% of that is tied to our in-district routes, moving students with either the big buses or the specialized transportation, moving them home to school and back home again each day. A smaller amount, just under 10%, is about $45,000, and that's related to contracted rates tied to field trips and athletics and the like. Those are all still covered under the contracts that we have with STA for our big bus regular routes. And STA's got them both now.
It also has.
Also has our routes. STA's got all of our route traffic now. Questions?
Counselor Cook?
Thank you. That 213,000 for out of district, how many pupils is that for? Are we estimating that to be for next year?
Let me see.
I-
Give you that number.
So maybe the superintendent can come in. I will tell you that the way those are priced, they're individually tagged. If you look in the school budget, you'll see every one of them has a separate cost called out. I think last I saw them, they're numbered so that there's nothing identifiable about them, but they're each in there. So I would say, yeah, that cost is for that number of students, however many that is.
Did we used to keep this in transportation? Was this previously in out-of-district?
So that 213, whatever the costs were for transportation out of district, that's always been in the out-of-district cost center. Well, I say always, for 6 years, 7 years. So there's a cost center that deals with out-of-district, cost center 165.
Yeah.
And then all regular transportation, meaning daily routes as well as field trips and the like, that all lives in 195.
So, but I'm just trying to, but the other cost center, 195, is increased 441,000?
No, this is combined.
Oh, it's combined?
Yes,
Okay,
sorry.
all right.
This is transportation culled out of the budget. Matter of fact, the athletic transportation is actually in 115, the athletic budget.
Okay, so
So
this is represented in
Yep.
the increase in out-of-district, and this is just to pull together for us to be able to
Correct.
visualize transportation?
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
A couple of things, Mayor, if I could. The answer for the estimated fuel contingency is 56,000 for the general fund, and overall citywide 66,200. If we could pause here, I know Superintendent McLaughlin has to get to the high school to be part of the Clipper Awards, so before we lose him, if I could pause just for this opportunity to ask him any questions before he takes off.
And I apologize to the council. The Clipper Awards Night is our biggest awards night of the year. And I have one part of the show, which is to close out with the Haven Medals, which have been being awarded for 163 years. And the superintendent always gives out the Haven Medals. So we're going to time it just right where I think I'm going to be running in from the back down to the front, grab the microphone and give out the Haven Medals, and the award winners are here, sealed. So, happy to take any questions, though, before I have to scoot.
Counselor Blaylock?
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Superintendent. I remember going to the Clipper Awards. I got a couple of those back in the day.
Well, I know we have a couple of alums. I don't have any Haven Award medal winners.
No, I didn't get any
in the
Haven
room.
Awards.
Okay,
I got
all
the
right.
Student Athlete Award.
There we go.
But I just wanted to ask about the Director of People Services. So the intent on funding that position and cutting 2 current tutors is that it'll lower the cost of this out-of-district? Is that the intent of this new Director of People Services?
Yes, and I know we keep having this conversation, and yes, that is the answer. I mean, a year ago, if we think about where we were, over the course of the last 2 years, last cycle to this cycle, the schools will be down. I think it is over 14 and a half FTEs between those 2 cycles if this budget goes through. Last year, when we were having this conversation, it was almost completely driven by special education costs. And so this is a direct, while we're making other reductions, and we're down 7.5 positions net, we still are trying to make a strategic investment to respond to what we saw as that big need last year. Because our concern is if we don't make those corrections over time, then we're going to continue to gobble up the rest of our budget to deal with this issue. And so we need to find a more cost-effective way. So the 2 positions, while we're reducing 9, we're adding back in 2 this year, and 1 is that position, but the other is a teacher who is in charge of a special education program at the middle school, specifically designed to better serve kids and simultaneously target kids that might be ones that without that programming might be going off campus.
All right, thank you. I've been reached out by some neighbors and actually some students, and they're worried that they're losing their tutor. So just as a former student at Portsmouth High and Portsmouth Middle School, I'd be upset if I was losing my tutor over funding a new position. It's just a little concerning here, but.
Counselor Tabor?
Yeah, on the same topic, we talked about this last time. There's 77 positions in the school budget dedicated to special education. And I guess my question is, to adding this new position, knowing that we have that substantial workforce, 20% of our head count, and 20% of our student body too, is affected. But my question has always been, why can't we do this within existing head count? Particularly when I look at the school budget and we have directors of special education at the elementary level, at the middle school level, at the high school.
So let me clarify, there are no directors at the middle school level, the high school level. There are people who are coordinators. Now what that is a teacher who receives just short of a $5,000 stipend to do some paperwork while simultaneously carrying an entire caseload, a full-time caseload of full-time work, where they are delivering services to kids. They are then doing some administrative tasks in relation to organizing meetings and some scheduling of paraeducators. But those folks are not sitting around with a bunch of free time in their hands to do these other tasks, which are program development. And so that's what we're moving to do. I think when people hear coordinator, they hear case manager, they think this is a person who the bulk of their day is sitting in an office doing administrative tasks, and that's not what these folks are. So in some ways, we do them a disservice by using the terminology coordinator, because all it is it's a teacher who we're asking to do extra stuff on the side.
Okay, well, I was looking under the special education portion of the table of positions. And just what are the goals and the plan for this position? What are the outcomes you want to see a year down the road, 2 years down?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation we've been having, which is our goal is to create more in-house programs, create the maximum amount of efficiency that we can I think the first goal is to put families in a position where they don't feel like, where we're not in a spot where they need to leave the district in order to get the services that they feel are appropriate. Second, even better, would be students who are already out of the district, bringing those students back into the district. Now, this position, I think we talked about this before too, is not a full-time addition. We already had an out-of-district case manager who was a half-time position that we were paying for out of special education funds, federal special education funds. So this person will be coming in, assuming that role, which already existed, and then we're really just adding this extra half capacity to do additional coordination and program development.
Counselor Bagley?
Thank you, and thank you, Superintendent. I feel like we've talked about this position at least 5 or 6 times now in work sessions. Yeah. I guess it's a confusing one. The RISE coordinator at the middle school,
Yep.
that effectively is replacing the position that was eliminated in last year's budget. And it's for the person at the middle school that helps kind of keep things on course when kids are having difficulties in between classes or during classes, and kind of puts a wrench in the works.
It's actually a couple years ago. Time goes fast, and so a few years ago, and it might have been. I'm trying to remember if in my first year here that position still existed under a different name or not, or if it just left when I was walking in. But it hasn't been present, and basically it's a special ed connected position for students specifically with behavioral and emotional disabilities. And it does, one is for those students, to making sure that we have a specific way to help regulate those kids in the school environment. It also is, and I think we've talked about this too, there's a ripple effect out into students who are not in those situations when we don't have the services to address those students' needs, and that can be disruptive to classes throughout the building. So what we're trying to do is to do 2 things at the same time. One, make sure those students have the services they need, so that our answer isn't, well, this is so disruptive, we're going to send you on a bus to Massachusetts. But instead, we're going to have you in the school with the services you need in order to put you in a position to then put you back into the class and serve your needs and simultaneously not have a bigger ripple negative impact on the rest of the student body at the same time.
Thank you. And part of the reason I asked is I think this is an essential position. I think we get a lot of value for dollar for it. And I had inquired with some educators, if there was a way to get money back into the budget, do we hire for it? And universally, they all said that, there's a time period when you can hire these educators. And if you don't hire during that time period, you're not going to get good ones. Just to kind of further reinforce the need to act when the window is open. So, like the transfer window in sports or something.
It's always challenging. Where we are, and I think we talked about this in relation to the fact that we had already hired the other role, one of the other role, not the one we're talking about right now, is we're not trying to be disrespectful to the council. It's just if we don't hire, Nathan talked about being in the middle, but maybe the end of the hiring season. We're really at the nadir of the hiring season right now. We've gone past the crest, and now we're on the backside of that hiring season. And every day that we wait, the pool shrinks and shrinks and shrinks in terms of who's available, especially for highly specialized positions like people that do behavioral work, because it's a special breed of folk who want to do that work on a day-to-day basis.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Zach. We'll let you get on to the Haven
All right,
Clipper Awards.
Yes.
Quick question.
Yep.
Would you be, since we don't control any of the budget or the line items of the budget, just the bottom line, would you be willing to entertain a vacancy factor if that was applied citywide?
So it's a good question. And the vacancy, I will just say this, on food service, Nathan did a good job of talking about food service. Well, what's happening both in food service and custodial is that those are positions that are difficult to fill and rotate a lot in terms of turnover. Food service is paid for through the revenue generated through the food service program, with some limited offset if we're in the rears because students haven't paid for meals. But otherwise, that's kind of self-contained. On the custodial side, on both the food service and custodial, what those people will both tell you is we are not fully providing the services in those areas. So, for example, on food service, because we've had such a struggle hiring those folks, we don't run the salad bars, which we intend to run in each of our buildings. Doesn't happen. On Ken Lynch's side, when Ken talks about facilities, he knows at this point, he'll tell you straight out that we are in all those, both sides, food and custodial, what we're doing is we're trying to compensate with overtime for a bunch of people. We're wearing people out, and we're also triaging the service. So Ken will tell you that if you go into our buildings right now, he's concerned. He knows that we are not up to the standard that we typically would have, and that the public would expect us to have. And I just had some feedback just the other night about some of our bathrooms at the high school for a public-facing event, and this is where we're down several folks. So we will always do what you give us what you give us, and we will do the best we can with it.
Sure,
but
just
there is
trying to
service impact.
Okay, just in terms of looking at the data over the last 10 years, maybe not outside of food service, just generally. I guess the question wasn't specific to the vacancies that you listed for this presentation, but just generally, any vacancies across the city department, that are between 1.5% and 4.5% in any given year. If we looked at a conservative number below that, is that something you'd consider? And it sounds like you would consider looking at what we present.
Yeah, you tell us what we got, we make it work. So
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin.
thank you.
Good luck.
While Dr. McLaughlin's still walking out, I want to take Councilor Tabor off the hook that he's not crazy. What you saw in the school budget breakdown is that the director, an existing position, is broken out a third and a third, a third across the elementary, middle, and high school components of special ed, rather than being in the central office. So that's not a building-based, it's not a building-based expense the way it's configured, but it is spread out so that when you were looking at the elementary, you see a piece of that position. And I think the way the budget is presented right now online, you also see a third, a third, a third of the new position. So
Thanks.
he answered the question that it's not building-based, it's not the coordinator, but it's in the budget. I know what you saw, so,
Fractions are
yes.
important.
Fractions. The mayor asked earlier about other non-salary, so this is the final catch-all of the other operating. We've thrown them into a grid, trying to help make some of this make sense, and if I just skim down through, I would say to you, in the category of training and education and conferences, there's an increase here of 35,000, and 2/3 of that is related to state mandated training in the police department. And so of that 35, there's 20, like I said, 23,620 or something. It's on a later slide because we call this out as a required element. So that is the lion's share of that change. In outside social services, we have added $11,500, bringing that area to 262,000. Contracted services throughout the city are up 2.41. Our contractors are asking us the same way to help cover inflationary costs. Those increases are looking at 3%, 4%, and 5%, but we've been able to contain that, and that really is across the city, those contracted service accounts, some of them smaller, some of them larger. In the area of software and computer maintenance, there's an increase here of $99,000. So city side, the majority of costs are borne in IT. We have a department for that. There are divisions within the charter departments, and these costs really are in the IT components of the police and the school department, although there's also a small piece here that is city IT. And this is outside of devices, which you'll talk about when we get to the CIP IT equipment replacement category, and Subida, the subscription-based software that we're picking up there. These are other elements that contribute to the software and computer support in the departments. Road maintenance and striping is up $11,000. That's part of highway, as is recycling, which is flat, and solid waste, which is down $20,000. Superintendent just left us, but there's a very small account, a very small catch-all, these categories of breakdown that the city has used for some number of years. And there's one category called student books and materials. That's increasing by $40,000. This is all part of the school budget, and I'll tell you that more than 2/3 of that is related to curriculum materials being purchased by the middle school. I believe it's math, but I'm not the expert to tell you what particular program of study is affected. And then in the catch-all of the catch-all, the other operating within other on salary, this includes across the city all of our repair and maintenance, supplies, equipment, printing, rentals. And generally speaking, these are driven by vendor pricing or inflationary pressures. And there are some notable new elements that we'll talk about in the breakdown later in the presentation about new items being added to the budget. But this $354,000 of new money breaks down essentially between schools, public works, and fire. And I'll tell you, because it's a smaller category in the fire department, there's a $35,000 increase related to vehicle repairs and a $4,000 increase related to ambulance equipment repairs, which adds up to all but the last $220 of that increase in fire. So that's the other non-salary component broken down.
Councilor Bagley.
Thank you, Your Honor. This might actually be a question for the fire chief. With the vehicle maintenance and repairs, it occurs to me that we used to have that was kind of handled in-house, but that person may have retired. Is that why we're seeing the bump, because we're outsourcing it? Or is it just the equipment's older and more expensive and costs more to repair these days?
Thanks for the question, Counselor. No, the answer is because the equipment's getting older. We still have the retired folks that are still working in-house, trying to reduce the shop labor. This is a case where the fleet is aging, and we haven't been able to keep up with it. And so showing what we've actually spent in previous years and trying to rectify those budget line items.
All right, and why I have you here, it's still, to get a new ambulance or truck or whatever, it's a pretty lengthy process.
Correct, right? And then, previous councils, right, we've skipped replacements, we've delayed, and as a result, that delay that perhaps was a year or two previously that you could overcome now has turned into a 5-year wait, right, by the time we place the order and go through the budget process.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have a similar breakdown for the school and public works in terms of vendor pricing?
So I'm working on a narrative for that includes line item detail. And I'm sure that I've got folks here who could help describe some of those, for sure. And I think a couple of them get called out in a later slide, and we could double back.
Okay.
And then if there's greater detail that we want to pull, we can keep working.
And then on the software computer maintenance, superintendent's gone, but what about the police? What is that software related to?
So, what's on the spot? There's about 60,000, I think, in PD, where their IT department is independent in some ways, doing their own thing.
Deputy Chief Maloney.
Evening, Your Honor.
Wasn't a softball, sorry.
No, would you mind repeating the question?
Sorry, there's a other non-salary, a software computer maintenance item on there. You're lumped in with the school, but Nathan said it was around $60,000. Just curious what that is.
So it's the difference between new software computer programs that are coming online and the cost between that and the previous system.
Okay. When was that, so when was that procured, I guess?
It's a number of different computer programs and softwares that have been procured. I don't have exact dates for all of them. They're over a period of time that we've added that technology within the last 18 months to 2 years for most of it.
Okay, I guess it would just be helpful to know, not tonight, but in the future, before June 8th, what the actual new software is and the functionality that it's coming with to the police department.
Sure. I can give you one example now that I think about. It's called a Faro system, or it's a crime scene mapping software, which is a new tool for our investigative division to use to map a crime scene. And the investment in this technology cuts down the amount of time and man hours it takes to physically process a crime scene, where we have this Faro device, which we can put in the middle of the room, and it will map everything in the room or everything in the crime scene in terms, in an hour and a half, as opposed to 4 investigators doing that over the course of 4 hours. So the investment in that technology, however, it's expensive. It reduces the overall time to complete that task in the future.
Sure, and I think that technology is the way that, you reduce overall costs by investing in things like that futuristic RoboCop thing that you just talked about there. But if we can, the better that we understand that, and the better that we can, point out, those things that you are investing in, is going to be easier for us to justify those expenses versus just having it be an 11% increase in sewer computer or software computer maintenance there. So just have a little bit more background on that would be helpful just before
Sure.
the budget's adopted.
Certainly.
Awesome. Thanks, Deputy Chief.
I got a couple more. I can help with a couple more things. I collected some data as I was looping around. One is, you've been through the slides. You've seen that there's a breakout on SBITA.
Yep.
The IT SBITA that I present to you tonight does not include anything from the police department. So license changes and growth of some of the core software elements are included here in this category for the PD, as opposed to SBITA, and that's something we need to work on for future cycles, where it would all be, all be listed in the same space. The other thing I will tell you is we'll talk later in non-operating about costs related to their new CAD RMS system. We've pulled them out of PD, and that's sitting in non-operating as a standalone that we will talk about in a few minutes. But you would see less of this here if we listed them with us in SBITA, and you could see them broken out that way. So that'll be the target for another cycle, for sure. Okay, so we dealt with salaries and benefits, we dealt with other operating. Now we're moving into the third and final section, which is non-operating. Everybody's taking a deep breath. They're like, is he done yet? Want to talk first about debt service. It's the first element of non-operating, and a big one. Although as an increase, it's only $15,000. The non-operating category overall is almost 18% of the total budget, but it's only 10% of the increase. Our debt service at this $15,000 is essentially flat at 0.11% year over year. I've done a breakout off to the left in the slide so that you can see the lines that make up the total debt service category. I want to draw your attention to $1.9 million that was mentioned at the microphone. That is the total budgeted impact of new bonding. In this case, we did that new bonding in April. We did it early so we could accommodate refunding. You'll notice that the 1.9 is in projected new bond payment, but in the principal debt, in the ban, the bond anticipation note is a ban, and the interest, you see they're all in the negative because we did two things as a part of the bonding in April. We refunded $8.1 million. We did so successfully at a total interest cost, an average interest cost of less than 3.5%, and saved over the course of the remaining 8 years of the life of those bonds $417,000 in interest cost. So you see us retiring principal and interest for refunding and then adding them back at lower interest cost in the 1.9 million. At the same time, we retired the bond anticipation of the ban that we had pulled for the community campus purchase, and we bonded for the remaining 6.9 million, I think, of that. So again, you see the ban going away, and you see new bonding hitting. But all in all, we worked within essentially our debt service budget. We only made a change of $15,000. And I want to remind you that we did that because we're carrying a AAA bond rating with Standard & Poor's, the best that we could manage with them. And we're proud of the work that we did in that regard. So that's debt service.
Not so much a question but a comment, but correct me if I'm wrong, but because you mentioned the community campus ban, and originally I think we had anticipated we would use COVID funds for community campus, but those funds may or may not have had restrictions that would have prevented things we could do with the property in the future. That's why we use the COVID funds for something else, and the ban and the bonding to pay for community campus.
Excellent, that's true. And we have made principal payments each of the years since that purchase through the ban. So the ban is, it's not a Band-Aid. In the way it was structured and used, we made principal payment each cycle. Having not found any additional or new funding streams to direct to that, to reduce what we'd have to bond, we bonded the balance of it moving forward.
Councilor Cook?
Are there any updates on the Rockingham County tax and what we're anticipating?
So I literally left a slide out, but I'll come back to that before the night's out. How's that? And we can talk more about the impact that could have. All right, so that's debt service. Hey, before we leave debt service completely, though, I wanted to take the opportunity to mention, the next slide is fine, thank you. I wanted to just not miss the opportunity to call your attention to Marine One, the fire boat. It's been a topic of conversation for the council, and I certainly respect that, but I want to make sure that I clarified for you and the public. There's no impact in FY27, the budget that we're proposing and presenting, or talking about, there's no impact of the fire boat. It is a capital item that was included in the FY27 column of your CIP, and if purchased, would be bonded if purchased. If we decided to go forward with the boat, we would do so by coming to you first in what's probably going to be July, when we bring you bond authorizations based on what's in the approved budget. And that would be another opportunity to talk about the boat, because having done that, the debt service would not start until the FY28 budget. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be talking about it today. It just means that there's no change to the 27 budget, regardless of what you do with the boat. I will tell you, and he's right here behind, has spoken to me, I've spoken to you already, that right now the chief is talking about a different boat at a price tag of $600,000, not $900,000, so it's 2/3 the cost. And for your information, I would tell you that the debt service on that over 5 years of borrowing would be estimated at about $132,600. And that would have a tax impact right now in today's numbers of about $0.01 each year. And so the calculated impact is $10.10 on the median single-family home of $777,000. It would be a $10.10 impact each of 5 years. And so I commend that to you just for information. Obviously, if you have questions about the fireboat, the chief is here, and we can do that right now, or we can do that later. But I wanted to clarify for everybody that, like the school care assessment, this is not an FY27 budget impact.
Counselor Bullock?
Thank you, and thank you for just that. But yeah, I'd love to hear from the fire chief just about the price of the boat. It's going to entail more training, and just why we need it now, I guess, or why.
Happy to explain. Good evening again. So the reason that the cost on the boat has shifted is merely because we found a different vendor who can do it for 2/3 of the cost. The original scope of the project and the original vendor that we had hoped to use to be able to mirror a boat that the Coast Guard uses. Back in December, the latest numbers we had on it had it in excess of the $900,000 number, to be frank. It was at $1.2 million. We've since found other vendors that are in the same ballpark. However, looking around, we found this other vendor that can do it for $600,000. So the question as to why now is a pretty simple one, in that this boat was bought in 2018, and this ties in with your other question, Counselor, with respect to payment. The boat that we're currently operating, we purchased in 2018. That replaced a larger boat, and the goal at the time was to get around a contract clause in the firefighters union contract where boat operators were being paid, and they were being given an additional stipend. This boat was bought 6 inches below that threshold, and it's, quite frankly, the boat that we have for the mission that we use it for with respect to being out on the river, being able to protect and do some basic firefighting, while at the same time being able to pick people up out of the water from either accidents or from bridge jumpers, that type of thing. It doesn't do the job in that it doesn't keep our crews protected. So, for example, we typically, I've spoken about this before, we typically take the boat out of the water in the month of December, keep it out for January, February, and March, and put it back in April. While the boat can still be used while it's in storage, the boat's out of the water, and it gives us time to be able to say, hey, is this really something we need to be doing and putting our crews at risk where they're exposed on an open boat? Back at the end of March, the town of Newington, who also has a similar vessel, they had to take their boat out of the river for maintenance. It broke, and they needed to make sure that they had a boat in the water for the bridge project that's going on for General Sullivan as a safety vessel. So they called up and they said, would you be willing to put your boat in a few weeks early? We said yes. So at the end of March, at 3 a.m, there was a subject that went missing, as luck would have it, off of the bridge in Newington. So at 3 a.m, our crews are out there in their survival suits with the Coast Guard searching for this person. And that particular night, at the end of March, was the night where we had some snow squalls move through. We picked up an inch of snow. So while it was okay, our crews came out of it fine, they were prepared for it. That's the type of situation that I'm simply looking to avoid, and to get a better vehicle that puts not only the firefighters, the men and women who are doing the work, but also the patients that we pick up, put them under cover as well, and keep them protected. That's sort of the 2-minute spiel, shall we say?
Yeah, thank you, Chief.
Counselor Bagley?
Thanks, Your Honor. And just to follow up with the, after the incident you just described, I recall, I think in first year of the council, I had inquired with the city manager about the high-level bridge and whether or not we should put nets underneath it or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think she put me in touch with you and the police chief. And as it turned out, there was, every time that there's an incident like this, it seems like it goes to one of 4 or 5 organizations on either side of the river. So there wasn't really like an all-encompassing network of what calls have actually happened or not happened, because it might have been the Maine State Police or the New Hampshire State Police or your team.
Yep.
And can you speak a little bit to like what's occurred since then?
Sure. So last summer, after a spate of high-profile bridge jumper calls, the New Hampshire Homeland Security Department, they put together a meeting between the state of New Hampshire and the state of Maine. They put the departments of transportation, the state police agencies, the local police agencies on both sides of the river, the Marine Patrol, Coast Guard, the Naval Security Forces, anybody who had a presence in the river, into a room, and we started having discussions, one, on who is capable of doing what, secondly, interoperability, being able to communicate, and then trying to standardize some sets of protocols with respect to responses to these types of emergencies. From that, I can tell you that, you know, the other portion of this is, to your point, where who took the original call and where it went. One of the challenges that we're having even here in Portsmouth is giving it an address and a title and being able to track them consistently. So one of the ideas that came out of this is that we would give it a standardized address, regardless of whether our crews were responding to underneath the Piscataqua, you know, to the high-level bridge, or we're going over to Pierce Island, right? That we'd give it a standard address, and then we could call through those boat responses to be able to refine them a little bit better, but to make it easier for us to respond. Because some of those calls were assist other agency, looked relatively benign, but it was actually a boat mission. So out of these meetings that we've been having every 3 months with all these different partner agencies, we developed a comprehensive plan called the Piscataqua Emergency Response Group Plan. And out of that, right, again, all those agencies I mentioned, we talk about common terminology, we talk about how we're going to communicate, who's responsible for what and where we go, predetermined response routes, rallying points, that type of thing. And then at what point, too, do we decline missions and say, look, this might be more of a recovery mission. Maybe this isn't right what we need to do, and how to sort of extricate the different agencies from a response that's been spun up. So we made an awful lot of progress regionally with our partners. I mean, I'm happy to share with you, you know, what agency is capable of doing what. You know, the Coast Guard, the Marine Patrol, they're certainly, they're our partners, but the reality is that they too are facing budget pressures. Coast Guard, you know, as you all know, you used to be able to see the cutters that were stationed here, and we're over at the Navy Yard. Cutters aren't here anymore. They've gone to smaller boats. They used to be able to deploy 2 boats out of their facility. They have enough staffing now for 1 boat, and typically what they're doing is calling us to let us know, 1, that they're deploying and they're moving, and that secondly, they're probably looking for us to help, because they'll need a backup boat, right? Their jurisdiction runs from Kennebunkport all the way down to the state line, essentially. Same thing, you know, the Marine Patrol, they got a presence in the river. They're not 24/7, right? But they do respond in from home. There's a response delay. Even things like where we're going to meet in a secure facility to be able to coordinate and do these types of responses and be able to talk, you know, face to face, have these radio conversations in facilities where we can all share the data and the information and make sure that we're doing things properly. So we've made a lot of progress, Counselor, so thank you for the question.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief, does the state pier have a boat?
So they do, the harbor, they do have different boats for, you know, utility boats to be able to do different things.
Okay, but no life safety?
Correct.
Okay.
And then the other thing I should mention too is that we're the only agency that provides any paramedic level care in the river. None of the other agencies that have boats, whether they be state and or federal, they don't have any folks that are trained or any EMTs or paramedics to be able to go out and initiate patient care.
I've known that, or I've heard that there's been a lot of conversation on the bridges versus signage, then net, or maybe increased height of railings, nets. It would be interesting to know whether or not the state is in a position or has any interest in terms of having sharing some of the costs for the operation of this boat going forward, given that they would be consolidating a number of different agencies in response in that regard.
I'm not sure where to begin with that question and where that query to the state, which agency.
I think you
I'm
would
happy to
start with
have the
Councilor
conversation.
Stevens, Executive Councilor Stevens, but to understand, where some of this cost could be shared across the different types of departments, the state pier being one of them. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
So we talked about debt service. We haven't talked about county. The contingency stays flat year over year. The next three items are elements of our capital budget, so they're included in the CIP. We don't spend a lot of time on rolling stock. That's an inventory that is documented in the budget book. The IT equipment replacement is a significant tech program in the CIP. There are element sheets that speak to that. And capital outlay is our pay-as-you-go. The slide speaks to, and it's important to note that these elements are not contractual, and generally, these three are all new money. So to the extent that you look at whether you have to do them or not, these dollars in rolling stock and IT equipment and capital outlay are essential and fundamental to the rolling of inventory and to the continuation of programs that you want, new initiatives as well as continuing things. But none of these are paying for something we've already done. These are all new initiatives. So in rolling stock, they're new vehicles. Do you want to do without all your new vehicles? No, because it dramatically impacts your inventory turn, but you certainly don't have to do anything this year necessarily. Same is true with IT. I would let the content experts talk about what the impacts could be with reductions, but in capital outlay, it's the same. What I can tell you is that from the requests that we started with, approved by the council in the CIP, in the case of rolling stock, we've reduced $345,000. In the case of the IT equipment, we were able to shave $160,000 from what was approved, and in capital outlay, we dropped $390,000 worth of programming. All of those things are identified in your budget book, in those particular sections of the budget. But they still represent cumulatively about $3.5 million. And so to the extent that you wanted to cure a budget question or need, those dollars right now represent an increase of $153,000, but they represent $3.5 million that are not contractual obligations and really are, even in the process we've already been through, balanced in a conversation of need versus affordability. So I commend those three to you as areas that we can continue to talk about.
Nathan, on those, we talk about kind of providing the same amount of services but as previous years, but this is all kind of net new stuff. How do we get to how does this number increase? If we look at that 2.9% increase, where does the increase come from? Is it inflation? Is it like, what's driving the cost of the increase? If
Sure.
we look at, we're growing that from years previous. Does that question make sense?
I think so, but let me start by saying, for instance, capital outlay was approved in the CIP at $1.95 million. We've reduced $390,000 of items that were eliminated or items that were reduced, and we landed at 1.56. We landed at that number because that was a zero budget impact year over year, but all of that $1.56 million that's proposed is new initiatives. So included in that are the solar array conversation, $50,000 to do exploratory and planning, $65,000 Artist Live Work that we discussed at length there one night, the electrification of the fleet planning and analysis, on top of things that you have seen in other years, like every year, like $25,000 for the public art fund, dollars for artifact trees and greenery. So for our part, I think the deliberation and the work that was done was to get to flat year over year, because everything that was in there was stuff we wanted to do. The $390,000 we cut doesn't make anybody happy if they're connected to them. The same is true with the other two categories. I think that if I brought Ryan Babcock up, our CIO, and he talked about the investment that we make every year in the equipment replacement. That's devices. I mean, it's servers and switches. It's also laptops in every police cruiser. It's everything but school technology. And by that I mean it's even some of the switches and network infrastructure. It's just not student Chromebooks and teacher laptops. The schools budget for that separately. But it's fundamentally everything that we do. And to short ourselves on that is of impact. And so we were very careful in exercising the 160 or cutting the 160,000 out of that. But again, we appreciate that everything that remains, the 1.2 million essentially, is all new purchases. So the number, the increase in this case of $153,000, it is, in my mind, is dwarfed by the fact that it's $3.5 million of new money that we generally include in the budget every year, not necessarily for a bunch of new initiatives, but to replace the things that we need. So others might argue that it's continuing and that you need it and that it's, you know, it's an obligation, not contractual, but it's something you really need to be operational and functional. But I commend it to you as fairly placed. It's not obligation, and it doesn't need to go up by 150,000. If you want it to go up by 5,000 or go down by 200,000, we can definitely do that.
Okay, and I'm just, thanks for that.
I hope if that was, I hope that answer helped.
It was helpful. I think I'm trying to figure back out to the previous slide where there was, where are we, so like, I'm not gonna find it, but, like, printing costs was listed. So, like, does that sit in, like, do printers sit within IT replacement costs, or is that not a part of, IT?
I would say generally right now, it's IT's running with it and responsible for it, but the funding, there's some funding for the consumption in general admin. Are you carrying, you're not carrying capital costs right now, are you?
Like the physical printers?
So printing, I mean, in this case.
I'm guessing they're printers, like actual printers.
Yeah,
you know.
the printing that I referred to in other salary, other non-salary, that printing is like cost per copy, it's ink and everything to
Toner.
keep, toner to
Okay.
keep that going, service contracts on the copiers that we've got. So I don't know that any of that is in IT equipment replacement.
Okay. Is it,
Because we don't buy that stuff and own it generally, it's on, you know, 5-year lease.
where could we
finance.
get the information in terms of like what's being, like the IT equipment replacement? Like,
It's in
like,
your CIP.
is it in the CIP?
Yeah, it's in the
terms- So
CIP.
it
Like the
lists
4
out,
pages.
okay.
Yep.
So it lists out everything there, okay.
And it listed out department by department, police and fire and the school element and et cetera. And it's, again, it's every device, it's laptops, what's sitting on this. I mean, they're all, the refresh of those things over time, that's what's in IT, along with the switches and network gear and you name it.
Okay.
Okay.
Counselor Bagley?
Just a comment, because somebody actually asked me about this 2 months ago, the printing. I guess on our, either the GovBid or the city website, there's like a contract that goes out for all of the city's printing needs, and it wouldn't be capital equipment because, as I understood it through the contract, is they come in and handle everything, and then, you know, they mark it up or whatever, but it's not really, it's like we're leasing the service, which includes the paper and the printer toner and things like that.
Yeah, take out the paper and sometimes they pay for staples and sometimes they make us pay for them, but it's generally the agreements that we enter into bring equipment in. There's a capital leasing cost and then a consumption cost. There are vendors that propose to blend that all together into a fixed cost. There's different models, but right now we are separate in the schools and in the city. City is consolidated with a couple of vendors, and we've been working right now to try to find our way to a unified solution that would find some economies of scale, give us one throat to grab a hand around when we need to, and start, you know, moving us more into the consolidation that we've been talking about. So,
Okay, thank you.
my pleasure. In the interest of time, I'll try to speed up a little bit, although I've been trying to do a lot of information dump, and I hope it's been worth it. Property and liability insurance is another part of other non-operating, and we talked about that previously. There are some relatively small dollars compared to the rest of the budget assigned to landfill monitoring, Coakley and Jones Ave. Those costs are there. Professional services for reval, we have a line in the budget that we budget every year and set aside encumbered for revaluation, which we do periodically, so that the costs, which are growing, by the way, so that the costs don't catch up to us in any given year. So we flatten that out and budget some of it every year. Hydrants. I didn't know that we had over 800 hydrants in the city, but we pay water and sewer a fee that is part of the fee schedule, and there's a budget here for that payment. And then Subida, our subscription-based IT agreements, we'll talk about those on the next slide. Separate from Subida, but part of that category, we've called out in the budget. Last year, the police body camera and taser subscription, we added that and talked about it. It's in its second year now. It continues to have a $65,000 grant offset, so it's under $300,000, $285,000, $289,000, something like that now. Port Edge, our new ERP solution that we're in the early stages of implementation. We're going to graduate the cost of Port Edge in over 3 years using the capital dollars that we've been provided. So we've paid for the first year already, and in 27 we'll pay for the second year of the subscription, and $120,000 of that $386,000 cost will be borne. $120 will end up in the budget as proposed. That solution, when we go live, will replace roughly $200,000 of legacy systems that we are holding on to right now, which is why we didn't ask the budget to pick up all of it, because we're already paying for the legacy stuff, but we'll be able to take those off the books. The fact that Port Edge is cloud-based makes significant savings as well. In the IT side, we're moving ever closer to being able to eliminate the sheer enormity of the data center that we maintain, and largely in this case to support that solution. So, and because one of the questions that was asked was about the plan or the expectation for the impact on staffing from the efficiencies that come out of the ERP, for instance, I would say to you that 2 positions already reduced in this 27 budget are related to the ERP. Those are the 2 in the school central office. So the personnel person, in replacing them, we will lean on the systems and HR, and then the assistant business administrator, largely accounting. We'll find efficiency and let that go, because we'll use the new system where we're all on the same platform to find efficiencies to do that work in the finance staff. And then the other new piece is the police CAD RMS, the computer-aided dispatch and records management system, upgrading better than 20, well now I think the deputy chief said 27 years. The core system that patrolmen use, that our officers use, finally being repaired. That is added as a line of its own in the budget so that we can watch it, $210,400. So let me go to the Subida, the next page, and just, I won't list them all, but I'll tell you that the first 3 are new items. AI-assisted valuation platform that assessing will bring on to replace the Power BI tool that we introduced during the reval. There's a co-counsel product that I know that the city attorney has spoken about in past meetings, which is a research and analysis and drafting tool that they'll use. And then new network platform support, Versa Networks. Those add up to $76,000, and those are new items being added in Subida. The rest of them, if you were to walk down through them, are cost increases that are described in the table. And this list covers $250,000 of the $262,000 of new cost in Subida. The other $11,000 or $12,000 just being yearly price increases, inflationary. If there's no question there, I'll take you to the next slide. Yep, please go back.
Quick question maybe for Ryan. Have we looked at, I know that VMware is kind of a forced upgrade or move to the cloud. Have we looked at alternatives like Proxmox that, and have we bid those out and found that this is the best to go for?
Go ahead. We took you away from T-ball for this, so you should.
Thank you, Your Honor and Counsel. Ryan Babcock, Chief Information Officer. To speak to VMware, they got bought by Broadcom. They've been crushing everybody with price increases. We avoided it 1 year by resizing the data center, and we were able to juggle licenses and avoid the cost 1 year. And then we had to license it. We couldn't avoid the cost again. We've resized the data center to try to limit our exposure as much as possible. But alternatives, there's Nutanix, there's Proxmox, there's other things. But our thing has been to go cloud. We're trying to get to SaaS solutions, modern solutions. We're trying not to host things in the data center. As part of IT replacement, there is an allowance in there for $60,000 to start accumulating money for equipment for replacing, if we need to, something on-prem. And it would probably be a Nutanix or a Proxmox, something small, much smaller than our current data center, self-hosted once the finance system is gone. And the data center is getting a little long in the tooth at 5 or 6 years old, so it's due for replacement. So the goal is to not have to replace it if we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. So, one of the overriding questions that was asked was, by the mayor, talk to us about contractual obligations, legal obligations versus, and this is how I'm translating it, versus continuing services items, meaning things that we have to do that are coming back year over year with increased costs because of inflationary pressures, and then call out, identify the new initiatives, the new things that are new cost centers that we need to address if we agree to. So, again, I can skim through them, but I will say, as I've said before, salaries and wages, benefits, those things are driven by our contractual obligations. Obviously, that's all predicated against the notion that you want to continue to do a program. And if you don't want that program, then we don't necessarily have to have the staffing that goes with that program. But if we have the staffing, then the salaries and benefits that they receive are contractual. In the area of elections, we've got part-time wages that are increasing because next year we've got two elections versus the one, and we saw overages in the prior year, so we're bumping to reflect that. I mentioned the police training, state mandated, with a new cost there. I picked up another one, police clothing, related to contractual obligations in our bargaining units, and those costs are climbing by a little over 8,000. There are others in that category, obviously, but this is an illustration of some. In the area of continuing services, some new costs or some increasing costs. The audit is budgeted up $5,000. I wrote this down, I put it in the slide, and then I thought about it later. It's $5,000 a year, but a piece of that gets charged off to the enterprise to pay for the fact that they're part of the audit. I think that's really only $3,750 of new money in the finance budget for audit. Director Wolf would tell you in inspection that he's got life safety code books that get published every 3 years. So this year we have to bump his budget up to reflect the fact that he's about a $9,000 cost. His budget's not up by that $9,000, but it's everything else takes a back seat, and this year he bumps it up so that he can use all of his dollars for that purpose. IT operating costs, Ryan could come up and talk to you about some of the core elements that are increasing in IT. Chamber tourism, we have for a number of years contributed $40,000 to the Chamber of Commerce in the Chamber Collaborative, in the relationship that we've had to promote tourism, and that number is being requested to increase by $10,000 to $50,000. See if I can do it justice. There's a new tourism something. Okay.
It's
Placer AI.
Placer AI.
Placer AI, which I would characterize as a tourism.
Well, it's visitor tracking. We don't love the word tracking, but it's a way to locate where visitors are going when they're in the city, and the cost would be shared among the Chamber, the City of Portsmouth, the Hampton Chamber of Commerce, and the Peace Development Authority.
Outstanding. So there's a $10,000 ad there. City Hall postage, I was reviewing this with somebody the other day, and I said, I can't believe that I plugged that as the number, but we bumped up postage because we've been in the deficit in the postage account for some number of periods, and wanted to right-size that. The reality is, with the new system coming on, the fact that we will probably cease sending accounts payable checks out with postage on them, we'll do it all electronically. I think in a subsequent period, you'll see us next year be able to make some great reductions there, but right now, we've been running behind, and so we're trying to cover that. You mentioned the fire vehicle repairs of $35,000, and we just got done talking about Sabita. $185,900 of that was the increases that were not of new items. If you go to the next column, which is new initiatives, and I start at the bottom, you see the $76,000 for those 3 new items that we talked about. You see the outside social services, if I move from the bottom up, outside social services, adding that 11.5 we talked about. The training officer for fire, the 60% inspector, and then, for instance, we're adding off-site storage costs for assessing records. That's $5,000. We started covering this cost and doing this with an off-site entity with the legal department a year ago or 2. And assessing is moving some documents out for permanent record keeping as well. So that's not exhaustive. That's just an illustration of some of the items that pop. Like I said earlier, I'm working on providing you a spreadsheet that kind of calls these things out department by department so that you can take a closer look. We'll get that out to you ASAP. And then with that, if we move to the next slide and talk about the question of reducing what is now a 56-cent, 4.88% tax increase, percent tax impact that we are estimating. What would it take to make that 3.5? And I think the question was asked maybe not just conceptually, but more specifically, what would it take? But in deference to not being sure, how do I say, I want to say, in deference to not wanting to create controversy, chaos, and anxiety where it's unnecessary, we've done a lot of work and identified some places. Some of those could be things that we could maybe move on over the course of the next year to make sure we can make cuts in or reductions in for next cycle. But the impact that would need to be felt would be 1.675 million, 1,675,000, to get us down to 3.5% tax impact year over year. That you can do that by reducing your budget some, and we've talked about some of the areas where you could do that, and you probably have ideas as well, or you could increase your estimated revenues. And so I guess what I would call out, or have called out on the slide, is that some budget reduction could be made. In talking to the Public Works Director, we identified that there would be savings, for instance, in not recycling in the city any longer. Certainly not something I'm recommending, but you could not recycle. You'd still collect the same tonnage, but you wouldn't separate it, and you'd pay less to send it to the landfill than you do now to send it to the recycler. So same function would happen, you just would put things in the same stream and you'd save dollars. We've talked to the library director, made sure she understood that we might say out loud, the library has a wealth of programming, and we could curtail some of that programming and see a reduction in staff as a result. The recreation director talked to me about arm wrestling because I told him we were going to suggest that maybe his oversight staff, so we have staff in the general fund with the director that include folks who are responsible for the facilities, Spinnaker, Connie Bean, the community campus. You could move some or all of those folks. No, you probably can't move all, but you could move one of those folks, for instance, like he has moved his part-time staff related to programs over into the special revenue and fund them by increasing your fees, $5, $6, $8, $10 of registration for whatever the programs, so that we could generate the revenue to carry those folks. So that would not be a reduction of service necessarily, but it would be an increase in the fees. Similar to that, on the revenue side, you could simply introduce new fees for things that have traditionally been free, or you could increase fees on things that have been set, and you could generate additional revenues there. And we generally explore that, but folks have found their way to steady state, and so an increase in fees beyond what we normally increase feels like an additional step, and that's something that you could direct us and we could do. To that extent, the Public Works suggested, he didn't really suggest it, I did. The Public Works the solid waste could move to a pay as you throw, and we could buy bags at the grocery store, and we would really not change our expenses because we would still collect, but we would generate new revenues that would be offsetting, and that would reduce the tax rate. And as an overall statement, I would suggest, I'm in no hurry to beat over and overestimate the property value increase that we might realize, nor to overestimate the revenues that we might generate. But I will tell you that we are very conservative in our revenue projections, and every year revenues contribute more to our fund balance at the end of the year than our appropriations, our spending does. You could change that, and we could be less conservative, and you could try to find impact to reduce the tax.
I don't think we should characterize it as abandoning a conservative approach.
Oh, well,
I
that
think
was-
we'd be less conservative. So
Sorry,
on
it's a little
that,
editorial here, clearly.
so for building permits, we're proposed 1.9. FY '26 as of, and you released April's today.
Yep.
It looked like we're running 129% of the estimate thus far. Is there a way, like, could we go to 2.5 million on that for an estimate and for FY '27? Now, I understand the boom is not always going to last here, but the idea that we're pulling it all back to fund balance, could we increase that by 600,000?
Okay. I mean,
That's one. I guess in terms of like, we cut the amount of investment interest that we're getting. Why is that? Why did we cut that by 7.5 or 7.3% this year?
the market is not returning to us the same as we have seen, and so we were, again, trying to be conservative. And we also found in this last cycle that we drained money market accounts. We have found the tax bills driving later and later into the year. And so we don't generate as much interest because we spend down our available balances as we wait for tax revenues to come in January. We've got to correct that. We've got to change our cycle so that we can get the bills out back in the early part of November and see those payments made in December. That means taxpayers, part with their money sooner than they might right now. But as a result, we go back to keeping our money markets with dollars and continuing to earn. But the combination of the reduced amount of carrying cash and the reduced rates that we're earning drove a projection that was lower.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, and it was the same. It was the same in the area of inspection. The suggestion there was, that we should lower this year and in 27 and in 28 because we're going to start to see slowdown. We stayed flat in inspection at 1.9 as opposed to going up, but the suggestion that came from the department was that we should go lower. So, but they're trained to be conservative with us.
Sure, but we're at 129%. So the idea that, I guess I want to, thus far this year from our past, our last, so appreciate that, but taking money out of taxpayers' hands to stick in a fund balance to give back potentially in the future is not something that should not be a practice that we're doing if we're overshooting it even conservatively, and we were conservative by a fair amount last year as well. Miscellaneous revenue, we've kind of kept that flat forever. Could we look at that a little bit more closely and see if we can improve that? And then the last one would be in terms of motor vehicle permits. I know that's kind of economy-based, but it's also, we're pushing a lot of resident, parking programs that will have, potentially more people registering their car with the city. Would love to be able to see what would be a less conservative, but still conservative
Sure.
Approach to those revenues.
So for those not looking at it, motor vehicle is up 350,000, but that's a small increase when you consider that last year we brought in over 6 million, and this year we're targeting to come over 6 million as well. But that's an increase from 5.6 to just shy of 6 million. The one thing that I would call out is that to the extent that we find savings I'm totally happy to do as directed, and it's a pleasure of the council, but as we raise less for this purpose and less for this purpose, and we anticipate more revenue in this category, there will be less fund balance available for the budgeted use of fund balance, which this year as projected will be $3.5 million that we'll take from those reserves to offset taxes when we set tax rates. So we stay conservative. We stay conservative in our estimates and generate surpluses that we then return in the next cycle, and leave ourselves the flexibility to be able to deal with challenges when they arise without an unanticipated tax impact. So we just monitor that. That's part of the exercise that we'll go through, is say, can we be less conservative or more aggressive in this category by some small measure, and recognize that we may find that we have less if we want to keep the reserve in the ballpark of 10 to 17. There's another thing. We stay within the 10 to 17. We actually stayed at 13.6.5, I think, for the last 3 or 4 years running. We could be at 12. We could be at 11. We'd still be within our policy. The risk is, how will they judge us, and will that make a difference? So, but that's a conversation we can certainly have.
Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a less impact question, but you suggested recreation increasing fees. And we did receive a request from a resident asking for us to increase non-resident fees at Spinnaker in particular because of kind of overpopulation of non-residents at this stage, and some surrounding towns sending people to Portsmouth to do things like play pickleball. Is that something that we could consider doing, whether or not we move supervisory staff to increase some revenues there in the rec department at least, and at least offset some of those costs?
I can stand and nod my head and say yes.
If I can speak to that, while Todd may be wanting to add to what I have to say, the fee committee, we did increase all non-resident fees proposed for FY27 at Spinnaker. And I'm looking for the number of non-resident members, which is 461, compared to the number of resident members, at Spinnaker, which is 929, for a total of 1390, and we have a rough cap of, we have a cap of 2,000 members. I don't know if there's anything Todd could add that might help rough out your thought.
Can I just follow up? Is that increase in fees considered in this budget already, or are those changes in fees too new to be part of this consideration?
No, the fees are all outlined on page 35 of the fee schedule.
Fee
In
schedule?
fees, is it 35?
But I think from a taxpayer perspective, those fees are probably about 19? Spinnaker? No, the general fund? Spinnaker doesn't go in general fund. Oh, one, so I can't tell you off the top of my head what impact there was on the fees for Spinnaker in the projection.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it.
Have to look?
Yeah.
I believe it was roughly 10% year over year as an increase.
20 is, I think, what we ballparked, but it was kind of on the fly in the fee committee meeting that we made the motion, and I tried to do the math in my head at 20%. But that is one of the things after we got that email. We haven't adopted those fees as a council yet.
They get
And there's-
adopted as a resolution in the budget.
Right, so we can modify it.
Correct.
It's just what the three of us as counselors are proposing to the council as a whole. And I think that one and maybe a couple others might get looked at in light of
Right, and we
this
changed
discussion.
our ordinance so that the council can at any point adjust fees.
But if there's an adjustment there that could lead to a revenue impact, then that's part of the impact we can have on the tax impact. Lots of impact.
And it would be,
I'm sorry. Counselor Hopkins?
I would like to investigate the solid waste pay-as-you-throw model with retail bags. Just out of my own personal habit, you have to pay for 5 or 10 cents for a bag at the Kittery outlets. I don't take a bag. So I think nominal fees like that can help change behavior, make people think about their waste, think more about like the consumption, which are all things that we would support our climate action plan and whatnot. So if at a future meeting or point, or I don't know, if we could get a summary report or something on what that would actually look like for implementation fees and all of that, I would be interested to learn more.
And I would anecdotally tell you that in my home with 2 teenagers, the bags that I had to pay for in my community, which were $6 a bag for basic waste paper bag that you in your kitchen, $5.75 or $6, it drove a whole lot of recycling, which was a good habit for the kids to get into.
Counselor Cook?
As a follow-on to that too, can we get some analysis on how that would impact the new ARM lift program that we're planning to implement for trash pickup and staffing if we had to go to a bag model? I know if you go to a bag model that
It's
the
annoying.
bags get picked up individually, yeah.
Counselor Bagley?
Thanks, Turner. 2 comments. First, you said we have to do a better job getting the tax bills out. I would point out that we are at the mercy of the state who sets the tax rate, and it seems the new trend is they're waiting to the very last minute because I think they're pretty understaffed in at the State House who sets the tax rate. So it's not that we're not getting them out, it's we can't legally send them out until it's set.
And I appreciate you saying that, but I will say that we'll work hard to have the quickest turnaround we can have from the moment that the rate is set to the bills actually hitting the doorsteps. We were faster getting it getting it out electronically, but we want to minimize the impact of the timeline between when we have a number and when we actually start to see dollars come in.
And then the second thing is a little bit to the mayor's point, like there's, the city really works at an accrual basis. We get 2 big lump sums of money and then the rest of the time we're in between. And there's 2 ways you can budget for that. Like you can budget really lean and go into debt when the numbers don't come in like you hope they come in, or you can budget conservatively, and then you don't have to dip in or make as many supplemental appropriations if there is an issue like the 1.57 comes to top of mind. Because we've done this conservative budget year over year, not only can we return to the tax rate, we also have the capability to address financial issues that we wouldn't expect otherwise, kind of rainy day fund. So why totally appreciate the idea that we don't want to be taking more money from the residents than we need to. In my opinion, it's better to protect that AAA bond rating and protect that rainy day fund than try to get the number as sharp as possible. I'd rather have a little bit of a margin for error towards us being conservative, myself personally, because I think it leads to long-term cost savings when you're not looking at it year over year. And I would say the same thing about the rolling stock. You know, if I think during COVID that we paused some rolling stock things because that made a lot of sense because nobody knew what was happening. But we're now seeing the net effect of that in the $35,000 increase in maintenance on, say, fire trucks. And anytime you defer maintenance or you go to a different methodology where you replace the stuff that you don't have to replace this year, you could stretch it another year, eventually you're going to have to pay that cost. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer because you don't know which way would be better, you know, if you want 6 years instead of 5 or vice versa. But I think, in my personal opinion, I'd rather us stay as more on the conservative side than the aggressive and lean side.
Thank you.
Counselor Tabor?
Did we budget the parking revenue for street meters at the existing $2? Because we've had discussions about whether that should come up to be in parity with the garage rates at $3.
I want to ask this question of my colleagues. Did we budget for new fees and new rates in the estimates that are in the budget book?
Was the question about on-street parking?
Yeah.
Which is in the ordinance?
Correct. We did not budget
Yeah,
for
so we
on-street
did not, right.
parking increases. We only budgeted for
Yes,
the
we did.
garage
That's
increases.
Thank you.
Because I was looking at our 669 on-street parking spaces. If they went up $1, that's about $1.7 million in revenue.
Counselor, I can tell you we have a report back from legal coming June 8th in regards to the process with the fee committee and the parking rates. That might help answer your question.
Okay. I guess it's the deeper dive into parking revenue would be if the garage rates go up and the street rates go up. You know, what would be our estimated revenue? Do we think that those increases would reduce volume in any way? I happen to think somebody's not going to decide, I'm not going to visit Portsmouth this weekend because the parking's $3 instead of $2. But, and, you know, if our parking revenue went from 11 million to, say, 13 million or 13.5 million, what are the uses for those sources?
If I could answer the what are the estimated revenues and skip the what are the uses for the moment. The estimated increase in revenue for Foundry, given the increase in garage rate in Foundry, would be 1.13 million. At Hanover, it would be 1.3 million. And if, the preview of coming attractions, if we were to increase on-street parking, as will be recommended or suggested in the report back on June 8th, that would raise another, bringing rates from $2 for the first 3 hours and $5 thereafter to $3 for the first 3 hours and $6 thereafter. That would raise another 2.6 million.
I was way low.
So 2.43 and 2.6.
Before you blend those,
Yep.
we've included, but the first two you mentioned, which are the garage rates, we've included that in
We
the
have.
budget now, right?
We have, but we did not include the
The last-
projected 2.6
Thank you.
were you to increase on street.
So just to follow on, I know that I know that we're drawing down our parking fund balance. I think you had a slide on
Yeah,
that.
I've got slide to show, yep.
I think we got a couple sides on.
Okay,
on
well
parking.
then, we'll just wait.
Counselor Bagger?
Just Councilor Tabor's, jumping right into the parking discussion. The thought, at least the initial discussion, is that we would continue to increase the resident discount. So this would be,
Thank you.
well, it's to be voted on and determined if there'll be a change at all. But one of the changes that we could do is keep residential prices more or less the same, and non-residential prices would go up.
Just before we go off
Yep.
this, and then it's more, I guess, we can have this as a broader conversation in June 8th, but I know that we've always looked at the our AAA bond rating as, looking at, having a healthy fund balance. I think that structurally would be interested to hear, any opinion, yours otherwise, if it's better to, use what we have in terms of over-collect, and then kind of use the fund balance to kind of, pay into this, or if we just are better estimating our actuals in terms of, our actual, especially in the salaries, and if we could have a vacancy factor, whether or not that's a better look to any adjusters if we're not, doing it. It's kind of opposite. One is using fund balance at the end to lower tax rate versus the other is collecting less, but knowing that it's not going to, divvy that back out to the taxpayer at the end. We could certainly hear the argument that one has a, structurally is good for AAA bond rating, but I could see an argument being made that, if we're better able to predict our actual revenue or our actual expenditures, then we're a healthier, stronger, financially sound organization that's, better prediction of, what we're actually going to spend, and thus, worthy of a AAA bond rating as well. But look forward to that, future conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt. 2 slides I'll just breeze through. This slide is simply because we're doing analysis in the general fund, wanted to provide you a simplified peek at the enterprise and special revenue funds, simplifying in the area of DPW some of the movement. And in this case, you have red bracketed reductions of positions in a reallocation to reflect where they're actually being funded, or what the work that they're doing and where it should be funded. So the very first line is a position called operations manager, and in this case you see a reduction of 25 or a quarter of a position in both water and sewer, and those are shifted, reallocated over to general fund, highway, and special revenue in the parking fund. And so you can walk through that and consider in DPW the 3.1 FTE reductions that we saw in general fund, but a net overall reduction of 1, and that being the custodian position that wasn't reallocated, it was eliminated. So in like manner, the next slide is the vacancies slide in the area of special revenues and enterprise. Again, you'll find those positions I talked about that show up multiple times because they are split. But certainly when you've had a chance to review that, we can take questions and dig down into any particular questions you have about any of the 3 slides of vacancies. But if we move beyond that, we're into parking, and after smiling at a couple of pictures, I take you to a graphic that's in the budget book for the last several years, which is an illustration of support of the general fund that comes from parking, from the parking fund, from parking revenues. So in the very first line, you'll see over the course of 6 years, the dollars that are retained as revenues from the revenue stream from parking. Right now, revenues flow through the general fund and are transferred into the parking fund. And at the end of the year, we keep, in this case, in 26 and 7, for instance, we keep $2.5 million in the general fund. But beyond that piece of revenue, parking, out of their special revenue, spend dollars on multiple programs and multiple cost centers throughout the city. And the idea in the illustration was to draw attention to and arrive at some assessment, some metric of how much support is rendered to the taxpayer through the general fund from the work of parking and that which they use parking revenues to pay for outside of purely just revenues. And so this is on page, yep, I eliminated my page number. This is on a particular page in the parking section of the, it's in the highlights, it's in the so it's in the first 30 pages of the book. And I think it's a 3-year or 4-year analysis there. We've added a couple of years, although having added it and then had more conversation amongst us, what I would tell you is that this illustration was largely an illustration being done at the department level, the division level, until 25. And in 25, there's some growth in the numbers, but it was partly because the finance department stepped in to help make sure that we trued up numbers and the numbers were actualized and Things like health insurance and taxes and workers' comp costs were all not estimated, they were actual. So I think for any decision-making, if you look at this, this matrix, this illustration, if you concentrate yourself on 25, 6, and 7, those are apples to apples, I think, a fairer assessment. The last couple of years, it certainly shows in the numbers that parking is growing its contribution overall by roughly 4% on average each year. Page 32 for your notes, page 32 in the budget book. So I just updated that for you to give you a sense that even as the 2.5 million is staying flat year over year, the support that actually comes from parking is not flat. It's been growing.
Councilor Boyle.
Thank you. Could you just explain the difference between transportation programs and transportation services? Is one coast?
Yeah.
Or is one?
Transportation programs is coast.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And transportation services, whatever they were in 2022 and 3 are gone now. So those are zero today. If nothing,
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, it was the shuttle, I think,
was
to
the
the
shuttle.
parking lot.
oh, thank you.
And
That's right.
I think it's always worth highlighting the transportation programs that the subsidy to coast is paid for by parking revenues, so not by the taxpayers.
Not by the taxpayers.
And it did go up substantially in fiscal year '25, but it's two things, and I think they're both coast, and then there's also the Christmas shuttle in there, but that's a small number. The senior transport, which I think is about 250,000, is that coast that runs that, or is that somebody else?
Yeah. It's coast.
Okay, so there's the coast, the bus that we
Right.
all see, and then there's coast if you need to get to a doctor's appointment. And they're two separate services run by the same nonprofit, and our contribution, I think, is about 950,000 right now to that.
Yeah, matter of fact, you're calling it out. That's the total amount, but that's actually 2 lines in the parking budget that you will see in the budget book, because it does separate.
And I think that the remainder is like the Christmas trolley or something like that.
Yeah, in the downtown loop, yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's 3 lines, okay? So if no other questions there,
Just
Yep.
a couple. On the salaries and benefits, that's outside of parking, or is that
Those-
just in parking?
those are, if you go to the parking tab, if you go to the special revenue parking in the book, you'll see a document there, the salary sheet that includes everybody that parking pays for. Everybody generally that you see with a split where it's allocated across multiple, those are the folks that are totaled here. So Ben Fletcher is 100% paid for by parking, and I don't believe he's a split. He's not in this number. But the piece of the Director of Public Works,
Okay.
that's what's here, along with a prorated share of taxes and retirement and the like.
Okay, and then, I guess the other question, we have continued to pay on the EV charging stations. It's in the CIP, that state and federal match. That's not, there's no state and federal match, but we continue to spend the 50,000 on the charging stations each year.
I'm gonna look for help. So that's,
So this was in support of projects that
That was
came
in
on in
support of
So
projects.
this
25.
is supportive, okay, so I'm just wondering in terms of it's like a 9-year or it's like 6-year plan in the CIP or something like that. I'm just wondering, how much is left over from that? Have we exhausted that? Is this what is this 50,000 doing this year?
doing
for
this
that?
year, right. And do we have a cash, are there some funds available right now from last year? We'll find that out.
Parking lot, the parking lot paving, that's a thing that we started last year, carried over into this year. What is that? What parking lot, and I'm sure I should have remembered this, but what parking lot did we pave
I
last year?
believe it's the Masonic lot, but I would need Peter to correct me.
Kept him away from the microphone a long time.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council. All the parking lots that we pave, so Worth Lot, the City Hall lot, any of the parking lots, so those monies contribute to that. It doesn't cover all the cost, But that's the intent behind that money. And we have tried to fund that annually, but a number of years we have not funded it fully because parking revenues haven't been keeping up with the expenditures. If you've noticed the last couple of years since COVID, we have been deficit spending. Unfortunately, we had fund balance to pay for that deficit, but that's in the next slide you'll see.
I'll move it along now.
Okay.
One of the other requests was, what's the status of the parking fund balance over the last decade? We've provided that here as well as an estimate. I'm regretting the estimate now because as I've spent some time and put out the financials for April and looked at it, the estimate for 26 is just an all-in. It's a projection from the beginning of the year. It anticipates fully realizing revenues, fully realizing expenditures, and any encumbered dollars from the prior year being spent. And in fact, revenue stream right now is headed for, I would imagine, low 80% for parking revenues, and the expenditures will probably not crest 75%. So we anticipate that we will have a negative impact, if you will, on the fund balance at the end of the year, but it will not be as great as the one that is projected here in the
Okay.
graphic.
So maybe Ben could help on this, but as of today, or as of April numbers, we're at 75%.
In revenue?
Of revenue to date. Typically, I wrote this down, like, on average, we're at 83%, or should be at that point in time.
Right.
We'll make up some, so our estimate is that we're gonna only get another 5%, or do we think that we're gonna get, where do we think we're gonna end up? You know, is it 80, is it 85, is it 90? Where do we think
Ben
we're
is
gonna?
on Zoom, and
Ben's
Ben,
on
if
Zoom. I
you
mean, I
can
did some-
unmute and raise your hand. Ben did say we're having a very strong May,
Yeah,
so
he-
those numbers are through April.
Okay,
Ben, if you're there, go ahead and chime in.
Maybe muted.
I don't know if I have to.
it's all right, maybe it just could be, you know,
We
an
can follow
addendum
up.
to this where
Yep.
we update with May's or April's numbers, and then recalculate what the expenditures are through this year.
Yeah,
Would be
I mean-
helpful to see what the fund balance truly is gonna be, and then,
Instead of that raw projection, let us do an informed projection, because like I said, it assumes we do everything. It doesn't take into account anything that we know from literally 10 months of the year, so we can, by the time you get this, we may be able to even have a decent projection on May to include for both revenue and expense.
great,
Thank you.
all right, you did it, Nathan. Wasn't easy.
You want me to? God, I was trying to get in under 2.5 hours. We did this once before, it took 50 minutes.
It is 2.5 hours, so I was looking at that clock, I'm like, you know, it feels, I thought we started at 7 at some point, and I'm like, it feels like a long 90 minutes, guys.
Peter had to go get me more water. Too much talking.
Any questions of the council? Counselor Cook?
Thank you, Your Honor. I have a clarifying question for a resident who asked specifically on health insurance costs, whether it's health trust or school care. We don't get to determine what is covered and not covered in these plans. It's not like a traditional private health insurance product where you go out to bid and you say, as an entity, we don't want to cover certain things. These plans have specific coverage that's already outlined in them in advance. So as a city, we don't get to change what coverage is offered. Is that accurate?
I think if somebody in the room has a better answer, please speak up, but I would say that we, as a member organization, we have representation on a large board of members, and the boards make decisions about some of those things. I guess I don't have to, I won't quote them, but there are things that come up every year or two that are controversial and potentially have cost, and the board weighs in and makes decisions. We can have a voice in that, but I don't believe we have a mechanism or opportunity to individually select differently. The pool says this plan will do these things. We could choose alternative plans, but even then, it's from a menu of plans that are being used or implemented throughout the pool. So there's a limit to the influence we can have.
If I can echo and add to what Nathan is saying, the respective boards make the decisions ultimately.
And we only have a representative or two representatives total on a board that is represented by all the members.
Right.
So we are a very small portion of the voting pool when it comes to making those decisions.
Correct.
Counselor Taber?
Following up on that, I was just curious whether the school care plan covers GLP-1 drugs, because it's now emerging that a lot of these health trusts, one of the major drivers are GLP-1 drugs at, $350 a month cost.
So what I recall is that the year that Health Trust allowed the GLP-1s, at the annual membership meeting of school care, the board did not put the question to the members, and this has to have been the year, the November of '23, maybe, did not put it to the membership because they wanted to wait and see the data from the rest of the world for another year and see more of the science behind it. And they were planning to come to the subsequent year and ask the membership council what they thought about it, and then take that under advisement to decide whether to add them or not. My sense is that school care did not permit GLP-1s in the formulary, so I think that's where they are. We can confirm that.
They did not. They did not.
They did not. Thank you.
Other questions of the council? Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
We will open it up to public comment.
Your Honor, we have one hand on Zoom.
Oh, Peacher's there. All right, Peacher, we'll get to you. I think there's some folks walking. Hope you're feeling better.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave, and I'm glad you saw Peacher's hand. She wanted to make sure to let you know she was there. First of all, I want to thank everyone tonight. This was the best dialogue I've seen in a long time among the council asking questions. The one way we all know that we can keep people able to live here and make it affordable is keeping our budgets down. When you're a landlord, the budget goes up, you're going to raise the rent. So I'd like to thank you all for that conversation and asking those tough questions. I would also like to thank the police for adding the social worker in. I've said for a number of years now that we need to have social workers on our police force, and that was added to this budget. One of the questions I have is, in giving your information tonight, we heard from Nathan that 5% is our step increase potential and 3.3% is our cost of living, which is a total of 8.3%. I would ask the council, why do we have people earning or getting a 16% increase, 18% increase? I would encourage you to look at the employees. I would encourage you to look at those increases and percentage, because they're way above the 8.3%. And a lot of those major increases are in middle management. They're not boots on the ground employees. So you have to ask yourself why. We know the cost of living is huge. Budget. We know the insurance is big in the budget, and we know the employees are the biggest percentages of our budget. Again, I shouldn't see, when I'm looking at that list, any more than 8.3% increase on an employee for year over year. And yet we have larger. The fireboat. I've been saying all along, I was criticized online by one of the counselors for going after the fire department. And I want to remind everyone, I sat on the board to look at Station 2 and create it. I was the deciding vote for the fire department during one of our council situations to get the increase. It became very public over overtime in particular. I have been endorsed by the fire department. over my career of 10 years as a counselor. However, the fireboat should not be needed. When I'm out on the water, and again, as someone who's on the water a lot, I am not going to call the fire department for help. That will not be my first call. That will not be my radio call. It'll be the Coast Guard. It'll be probably second, it would be Fish and Game, the state police. What we heard tonight is that the fire chief is saying that we need it for when we have people that make poor choices or choices of need for mental health crises on a bridge. That's what we've heard all along that we need for it. Then my question is, can you imagine what $600,000 would do to support making sure people can't get off a bridge? Making sure that we're dealing with mental health? The fireboat, Mr. Bagley last council meeting said he didn't want just someone getting on a boat. When I brought up what happened on Appledore and the town of Kittery when someone needed to be some emergency services on an Appledore. It was not just any boat. It was the main Fish and Game boat. They went to the pier, picked up the EMTs and the medical professionals and took them out and dealt with a crisis. It was a good way to handle it. We need to think about those good ways. I am fortunate to have dignitaries that are at my marina. When they come and need security, I can tell you how many people are in our river that can provide it. We have the state police boat. We have Fish and Game. We have Coast Guard. And then we also have sometimes the harbor. We need to think about what we're spending things on. Now, it was said that this is going to come back again and talk. You're right, the boat is going to come back. However, in this budget is educational services to keep that boat going. In this budget is overtime for people to go down to the south, or I can't remember, I'm sorry, I apologize, but I can't think of where they're going to get training. That's in this budget. So I support the fire department, but I also have to support our citizens that are trying to do whatever they can to live in this community. And I would ask you to think about where that $600,000 is really needed. Are we needed for a fireboat that might go out a couple times to support someone that might have jumped off a bridge, which we heard? Those are the only suggestions we ever hear. Or would it be better to take that $600,000 and look at how we can make sure that person doesn't jump off the bridge? I have been very vocal about this school. I have been vocal that we do not need to add middle management there either. As we know, special ed is very dear to my heart. I am doing my 30th year in special needs. However, there is nothing in this budget for funding for programming. There is nothing in this budget to show how we can expand to make it more appropriate for students to stay in district. We need to remember that our out-of-district monies are only Portsmouth kids. Other sending district, Newington, Rye, Greenland, they pay for their own out-of-district placements. So that $5 million is only a small portion of our whole student body. We have directors in every one of those districts that are making their own choices at meetings. They're called LEAs. And those directors decide where their students from their district go. So what we need to think about is, what do we want for our Portsmouth residents? And I'm really sorry to see that we're adding middle management and yet we're taking away those people that need to be in a classroom. Those people that are having direct contact with our students. You talk about the employees. The majority of this council added 42.4 employees at one point. Last year, you got down to 34.4 employees. The majority of this council still has added 24 employees to the budget. Again, I thank you for asking the city tonight, first time I've heard it, to live within its means, to make it an appropriate budget that doesn't take extra funds from its citizens. But I think we all know the employment cost is our biggest. There's a lot of openings that have not been filled. And I would ask you as a council, if we can live without those employees at this point, then maybe we should think about why we're filling them. If we can run our programs without these people, then maybe we need to think about how we can get down those 24 employees that you folks have added, or the majority of you folks. Again, thank you for the conversation tonight. Was really impressed. However, we need to go a little farther, because you all ran on making sure that Portsmouth's affordable, and the only way you really can do it is control the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name's Eric Anderson, 38 Georges Terrace in Portsmouth. This was a very comprehensive explanation of this budget, and I appreciate that. It gives better dimension of the revenues and the expenses. I appreciated the mayor with the variety of questions that he asked and the responses that came from Nathan, because on each question opened up the opportunity or the possibility that this budget could be reduced. And I think I think Nathan made that indication that yes, it can in certain categories or across the board of a very extensive budget with a lot of categories in it. So I appreciated those questions, Mr. Mayor, and I thought they were very qualitative. And the answers were too, because it leaves room to, it's not I want to emphasize, it's not impossible to reduce this budget in some way, shape, and manner. I appreciated the mayor's comments on the fact that the budget sometimes there's an overprojection, and the taxpayer pays for that overprojection for it to go into the fund balance. And the fund balance is used for a variety of, for the, our AAA rating but how much of the fund balance is available to defer some of the increases that have been projected this year? It would be interesting to find out. You're going to have to come to some juncture. You always do when the rubber hits the road on the final budget. And so it would be interesting to find, to hear what possibly can be used out of the fund balance, because the taxpayers pay for those over projections. And I think they're entitled to them, in some way, along the way. I was kind of disappointed with the fact of some of the items that were presented for generating new revenue or reducing some of the costs. They're always kind of put into a service-related discussion that, and I don't think people want to see a reduction in services, especially the ones that were explained in the brochure. So there's other ways I think that this budget can be put into perspective and brought down. finally, I guess, I've made previous comments about the fireboat. It was good to hear that the fire chief seems to have it, you know, it was basically a blank check for $900,000 in the CIP, which has been brought, you know, maybe brought down to 600, so that's a step in the right direction. And I believe it should have been, there should have been an RFP on it to some extent, so that we get a better idea of who's capable of producing the type of vessel that is needed for the cheapest cost to the city. One question that wasn't answered, that had been, I think a question had been raised, is what's the full physical impact of this vessel in regards to labor and overtime that it's going to have to be incorporated. The boat's the boat. What it takes is to man that boat, there is a physical impact. And that hadn't been really fully explained by the chief, but does it need 2 operators? More than likely it does. One's off duty, they need the boat, somebody's gonna be there. So it's gonna take 2 people to run that, you know, to be available. And the amount of overtime, if you have to put a crew on the boat, the amount of overtime that's gonna have to be placed in the stations to cover that, to cover the, any, you know, cover the vessel, cover the people that are on the boat. I'm not sure in all of the discussions about the boat or the vessel, how many events have been documented that justify the expense. I'm not saying that it's not justified, but it's very few. I'd like to hear some of the numbers, or I don't think that number has ever been presented in this discussion about the vessel. And one of the, you know, what happens to the current boat? One vessel is a boat. 2 vessels are a fleet. And I don't know whether there's the capability of recovering some of the cost of what's currently there, or if they're planning on retaining it. They're two different vessels with 2 different capabilities. The current vessel they have can get right to the shore. A $600,000 vessel isn't going to be able to rescue anybody that's in 3 feet of water. So I'm not sure what that dimension is. The first fireboat they got, they had to give it away. It went into surplus. They could not sell it. And I don't know if that's the circumstances with the boat that they currently have. If the funding for it prohibited it to be sold, or is it got to go into surplus to be, you know, to be accessed by another municipality? I appreciated the fire chief's comments with the fact there's been some regional discussion about any of the issues on the river that need to be, you know, attended to from a emergency status. And it seems to be that somewhat of the burden is going to be again placed on Portsmouth for their investment in the infrastructure, for their investment in the vessel, for their investment in employees to run the vessel. And there isn't more of a regional discussion about who's going to bear the cost of this. I think I expressed to you before in a previous comment, Portsmouth's exposure on the Piscataqua is minimal compared to the surrounding towns in the state of Maine. So maybe, again, I just think that deferring this particular expenditure at this time until there's more of a regional discussion of what's going to be needed is fully vetted, so that if it's a regional approach, other towns and communities can make that contribution to some piece of, you know, some vessel for, and it's not all borne by Portsmouth. Portsmouth provides a lot of services to the surrounding communities. I wouldn't want to, I stated it in, in previous comments, and it's done a good job in investing in infrastructure where other cities or other towns haven't. Just with regards to the fireboat, I mean, Newcastle has I'd put it right in the classification of a rowboat. Town of Rye, they got a skidoo, or not a skidoo, but a sea-doo. Newington probably has a vessel comparable to what Portsmouth has now, I think. But anyway, it's their investment in totality between those three communities is far less than $600,000. So I hope you'd at least consider, like I said, if this is something that's needed for safety and that it's more fully vetted amongst the surrounding communities that have responsibility on the water to see what their contribution is going to be to provide that safety. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. One question is, and I don't expect an answer, maybe it's going to be explained, but through these iterations of work sessions, when is this council going to make some type of final recommendation of where this budget should be?
Oh, sorry, those will happen when we go to adopt this budget. We'll have motions and amendments as we prepare that. I'll ask that we have those in advance so that those would be in the as agenda items on there, and so that Abby, Michael, and Nathan aren't doing the math on the fly in the back of the room. So that would be in advance of the meeting that we would expect to adopt the budget.
Yeah, and that's what I really recognize from past, but the closer you get to I think it's June 30th, if nothing.
So June 8th is when we're scheduled to, well, when we're hoping to have the budget adopted. June 30th is the time period of which that is required for us to adopt the budget. If it looks like we're not going to be able to do so by June 8th, we'll schedule another meeting the week following on June 15th. I think that's
Thank you for
not
that.
a
It just puts some perspective into the process that I think, clarifies it, and appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. Anyone else in the chamber? Oh.
Buzz Scher, 390 Greenleaf Avenue. I want to give a brief update, such as I can, about the county tax situation. I'm taking Nathan's fire.
Sorry, missed that.
The problem that developed over the last 4 or 5 years is that county commissioners have been dipping into the fund balance on a regular basis to balance the budget. So several years ago, the fund balance was around in the mid 30 million area. This year, it's around 6 or 7 million. And so the county commissioners decided this year to try and reinvest in the fund balance, and so they have recommended a budget with which results in a 13% tax increase, which is substantially more than we've budgeted for here in Portsmouth. There is a bipartisan movement afoot among members of the county delegation, including me, to try and smooth out that increase. So instead of it being a 13% increase this year and lower in subsequent years, to make it a 9% increase, which will moderate it a little bit. It won't bring it down to the, I think, 3.75% that we've estimated in Portsmouth. But that's where we are now. I don't expect In the ideal world, I think it's possible it will come down to maybe 8%. There's some people trying to do that. But I expect it will likely be 9% or more. So we come up with we vote, the county delegation votes on the final budget sometime in June. I can't remember what the date is, but that's where things are.
Thank you, Buzz. And Petra, as soon as the city manager returns. Oh, Kevin, Petra has her hand up. Petra, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Yep. Hope you're feeling better.
Oh. Have crutch will travel.
All right.
Okay, so the first thing I want to say here is this is the best budget workshop I have witnessed by this council or any other council. The questions were great. The answers were great from Nathan, and but I have more. So I just want to say that first off. I think these are the best questions that I've ever heard from a council, honestly, and I've been doing this for a while. So you know my questions are about salary. I'm going to talk about salary, and I'm going to talk about FTEs because I'm still having questions on some of that. And the answers that Nathan gave still leave me with questions. So basically, I'm looking at and I'm talking about the collective bargaining contingency that Nathan said you can't use the budget book because there's so many other factors there, and the collective bargaining contingency was in there. So last year it was almost 2 million, 1.99, and this year when you look at the budget, that should have already been rolled in to the salaries. So I would not expect that to not be in the budget book that I'm looking at the numbers with. Right. And this year also, as far as asking about increases, if I look at page 15 in the budget book, it tells me that for the general government, we only have one union that's in negotiations here, and that adjustment should be included in that 460. So, as far as the not using the numbers in the budget book or not accounting for increases or anything else, I'm struggling to believe that, because what else do we have to look at as residents if we can't look at the salary from last year and the salary from this year? So that's the first thing. And like I said at the last meeting, I have completed looking at all of the budget increases in all of the departments, and the standard increase, you state here again that the cost of living is 3.03, and I'm still looking at standard almost of all, especially middle and upper management, of 6%. Now there is, as Esther noted, there is quite a few that are above that, and the only way that a person would know that is if they got a promotion, and a promotion would generally be a change in title. Now there are a lot of that, and there's a lot of movement, especially in the public works arena, between public works, water, sewer, and stormwater, and parking. But I think I'm still looking at substantial increases in especially IT, in legal, and in tax collection on the general side. And then I have completed my analysis, especially on parking and other the other public works areas, and I am totally, I guess, confused. And this is basically hard to do because I used to do this allocation stuff. And I'm looking at page 190 and what you put out for the position summary. Now, I didn't read the fine print under here, and it says includes only new positions and other department transfers and interfund. Now, it was mentioned that, that especially the master carpenter was decreasing and moving out of Public Works. Yes, that position is moving, but all of the expense that is decreasing there is moving to water and sewer, which also increases our rates over there, which we already did this year, and we already know. The other question I would have on this schedule here, and I don't know if it was answered by the title, but on a lot of this, especially parking garage foreman down in the Public Works area, we've got foremen, we've got managers, and we've got technicians, and it says they're all being eliminated. And then I noticed that the positions they were promoted to are not included in here. So they're not really being eliminated, they're being promoted, which means you're not eliminating any positions as far as this goes. You're promoting, but you're not including that. So this is kind of a trick for me. The other question I would have, and I'm going to, and I'm still comparing FY26 to FY27. And there was something that just jumped out at me, and I don't see it anywhere. And in FY26 and FY27, the same thing happened. This is after water in the salary area, and in 27, it's on page 467, and this is called additional personnel. And in that additional personnel, which is not included in water, sewer, or anything else, we have an operations manager, and we have a plant operator in FY26, which totaled like $129,005. And in 27, we've got an operations manager, a foreman 5, and a plant operator, and we're up to 204,217. So my question on this is, where is this headcount included in anything? And how does this affect, how is this included in the salaries and the benefits and everything else if it's listed in here as additional? What does that really mean? So those are my questions as far as that goes. And I'm not really happy that, you know, we're still saying we haven't added any positions. If I look at, I'll just give you an example for parking. We've changed, I don't know if we've changed or we promoted, and I should be able to figure this out as a resident. We've got a new assistant planning director that looks like a promo. We've got business administrators. We've got something called a communication and digital specialist that's working for the Public Works arena. The salary is divided 4 or 5 different ways, and I guess my question would be, what do we need this for? I'm not getting this, especially when we have communications and a whole in City Hall. We also have tech wastewater operator manager that looks like new, and we have a lot of promotions to of regular operators and foremen, and the highest I've seen was a foreman 7. I'm sorry, I have never seen a foreman 7. So this is just amazing to try to follow how these positions are moving between all of these departments. And to me, it still looks like we're not really saying how many people we're actually hiring. And if I have to go back and check through all of this stuff, it should be more straightforward. So that's one thing. The next thing is, I'm going to also speak on the fireboat. So the first thing I want to say is that I would thank the chief for getting up and explaining and looking to take the price down. But for me, that still doesn't, explain a lot of things. I mean, there's no public explanation why this replacement is needed now. We have never heard, and maybe I missed it, but it doesn't sound like Eric heard it either. How many calls have we had in the last 3 or 4 years since we've had this new boat? What I'm looking for is the cost-benefit analysis. analysis here. It's not that I don't think we should be taking these calls, but, you know, I just want to know, how often is Portsmouth the primary responder? You know, and why existing mutual aid resources are not sufficient here. But I was kind of, I don't know, taken back when the chief started explaining that they're just now getting into having meetings on who responds and what needs to go out, and when a call comes in, what happens. You know, being somebody from the other side, you expect, you know, service quickly. And it was surprising to me that the Coast Guard wasn't the first person, or New Hampshire Fisheries, or anybody that is on the river all the time. The next thing I would still like to know before I say anything on the fireboat is what are the specs on this boat? Has anything been done on this? Because when I went back to the CIP, the only description we had here, we had a description last year. This was a rib craft. Purchase cost $175. Year of purchase 2019. Sorry, Chief. This is supposed to have a 10-year life. So basically, a lot of this, and it sounded like this is what was put in there. A different kind of boat is desired. So a desire and a need, to me, having done budgets for a long time, there's a lot of desires. But do we really need this? And do we really need to spend all the money on the training? I mean, the purchase price is one thing, like somebody said. That's only the tip of the iceberg, basically. There are significant long-term maintenance costs. Training, fuel, insurance, and specialized marine operations that go with this. So the question for you know, me at this time, especially after the chief explained that they're still going through, you know, it sounded like they're just getting organized on this, which is a little scary. You know, I think it would be good to step back and wait till all this comes out and then respec this, because if we're only going out to support, do we need to spend $600,000? I mean, I understand, you know, the guys are getting cold and they're out there and all this other stuff, but with 4 or 5 agencies out there, you know, is it really cost beneficial for Portsmouth to be carrying all of the cost of this? So that's the first thing on the fire department. The next thing on the fire department that I've noticed, and that is really is concerning to me, and it was said that basically I don't know anything about how a fire department runs, and we know who said that. I don't have to name names. So I took that as a challenge, and I started researching it. And what I found was that it was interesting to look at somebody that had more calls than us, that had more population than us, and I'm talking about Dover, and that last year they decided to move 4 of their admin people down into boots on the ground to kind of quell the overtime and have more support on their actual boots in the ground, and basically change their whole cost structure. So my question on that is, have we looked into that? Would it be beneficial to our fire department and our budgets, especially on the overtime recall? And on the overtime recall, this has been a question that has been asked by numerous city councils, and this year we again overspent our 1.6. We were at 1.7 something on our overtime recall. And as I promised, I asked for the overtime recall so I could understand what was going on here and what kind of calls was making this up. So when I pulled that, I had a lot of questions, and a lot of questions came from, I looked at the overtime recall in FY21. And the overtime recall that was budgeted at that time was $120,000. The overtime recall that was budgeted in FY '26 was $553,000. So I wanted to know, well, what's the big increase? That's an increase of over 350%. So what's making this up? So when I actually requested the overtime recall hours, I found it very interesting that a lot of the stuff was obviously emergencies, but a lot of the calls were made up of meetings that were known or events that were known. And the question in my mind became, in my research, is there any other way to do this? Or and who would do this? Is there some other kind of logistics that we could do to basically, save money here? So I looked up special detail versus overtime recall, because that's what basically these are called. And I did some research, and first of all, the first thing that came up here was municipal fire departments typically prefer to use special detail for scheduled special events or meetings. This method is favored over relying solely on overtime recall for several reasons: better planning, resource management, and cost efficiency. So after reviewing the data and looking at some of the reasons that we were calling guys back who already had done a shift, whether they wanted to come in or not, my questions were numerous, because I was looking at not only brush fires and stuff like that that were actual emergencies that you would expect to have recall for, but I was looking at things like checking out the fire engine, and school kids ride to school, and except for substituting for other firefighters who were out, which is accepted. A lot of these were planned meetings or something that could have been scheduled as a detail and not used overtime. So my question went on, and then I went, well, who schedules this? So basically, this is management administration. So I would like to know personally, after looking at a 360% increase in overtime recall, why we are not looking at something like this to take our numbers down. Because over the last 3 or 4 years, the overtime in the fire department has gone through the roof. So for me, I'm just looking at ways to try to help and save the taxpayers' money. And when I saw something like this brought up a whole bunch of questions, like, why are we not doing this? So that would be a big question for the fire department, and maybe we could get an answer on that, and maybe that would help our fire budget. The other thing on the Dover taking 4 admin positions and moving them down to boots on the ground was a lot of their training. They revamped what they did as far as training and who did it and what rank they were and all this other stuff. Now, I don't know anything about what the union contracts say, but I know you are still negotiating with the fire. So I would put that out there as a possibility. And, Dover had almost 1,000 more calls than Portsmouth did, at least in 25, in reading their presentations. They had 7,115 calls. We had 6,160 from what I could find. So please, from my perspective, it would be great to look for anything that would help the fire department function more efficiently and also save money for the taxpayers. The last thing I would like to ask here on my list is, in previous meetings, we had a big question on the School Finance Committee meetings of April 1st, 2026. And in my mind, this goes back to the FTEs, because I don't know that this question ever got answered. And basically, it was the Financial Compliance and Cost Center 207. And what it said was there's a lack of transparency, and there's about 40 plus positions that are often hidden from the main budget book. So my question is, has this been has this changed? Has this been added into the FTEs? How has anybody dealt with this? And that's another thing that makes me question the accuracy of the FTEs and how many people we're adding and how many people we're moving, because moving partial people and moving them to another, I guess, cost center within the public works realm doesn't help the costs. So those are my questions. I hope they will get answered by next time. The last comment I'd like to make is I think it's a great idea on the solid waste. I was always wondering about this, having lived in many different municipalities that had many different solid waste collection methods, including, dump your own, we don't care, and we're not going to help you. But we also had, the bags, we had, you take all your recycling to the bins and that's it. And for the past couple of years, I remember Peter saying that we're not really sorting, we're not really separating, but we're still asking the residents to do so. So this consolidation would be a great thing. And I think it would be great to cost it out as soon as we can. And that would be my comment on that. Those are my questions, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Petra. Feel better soon. Just as a note, I did ask Director of Public Works, Peter Rice, on whether or not we do recycle. We do separate and recycle. We carry it to a different, it's carried to a different facility. In doing so, we pay a lot more for that because, as we learned, 6 years ago, when China stopped taking our trash or our recycling and cleaning it, the cost per tonnage went up quite a bit. But seeing no other hands on Zoom, long night. Thank you all. Thank you, everybody in the audience. School Party and Dr. McLaughlin's back. All right. Hopefully, gave out the different ones. All right. But appreciate everyone. Good night, Portsmouth.